By the time the sun rose over Bellather, the most feared man in the river city was standing in an alley behind an old steel factory, staring at the one woman he had spent 5 years misunderstanding. Nikolai Drazzich had seen men die with knives in their hands and prayers in their mouths. He had watched rivals beg, bankers fold, judges sweat, and killers lose their nerve under the weight of his silence. But nothing in his violent life had prepared him for the sight of Meera Calder, locked inside a refrigerated delivery truck, her lips blue from the cold, her dark hair frozen to her swollen cheek, her torn burgundy gown glittering faintly beneath a crust of frost and blood. The truck sat behind the lyric furnace, a dead grey box under the first pale wash of morning light. Once, the building had been a steel mill that spat fire into the Bellather sky. Now it was Nikolai's favorite place to hold court. All brick arches, iron beams, black marble floors, and chandeliers hanging where smoke used to gather. The night before, the city's richest liars had danced there under masks and music, pretending elegance could wash the blood from their money. By dawn, the music was gone. The guests were gone. The only sound was the low growl of the river beyond the loading yard and the soft, furious breathing of Nikolai Drazzich as his men cut through the frozen latch. When the door finally broke open, cold air spilled out like a ghost. Meera was curled on her side between stacked crates of wilted flowers and empty champagne cases. Her cracked glasses hung crooked on her face. One wrist was wrapped around the broken edge of a false security badge. Its plastic snapped almost clean in half. In her other hand, locked so tightly her knuckles had gone white, she held a burned strip of copper wire. Even unconscious, even beaten, even half-frozen, Meera Calder had not let go of the evidence. For one long second, Nikolai could not move. He simply looked at her. Meera, who always walked 3 steps behind him with her ledgers pressed to her soft stomach. Meera, who wore dark dresses and quiet shoes, who corrected totals without looking anyone in the eye, who carried the private account books of his empire like they were church candles instead of death warrants. Meera, whom his captains forgot to greet and his enemies forgot to fear. Meera, who had annoyed him, interrupted him, delayed him, embarrassed him, and, he now understood with a sick twist in his chest, maybe saved his life more times than his pride could bear to count. He stepped into the truck himself before any of his men could touch her. The cold bit through his coat, but he barely felt it. He knelt beside her, and for once, the great Nikolai Drazzich looked almost uncertain. His gloved hand hovered over her bruised face before he carefully brushed a frozen strand of hair away from her mouth. Her breathing was shallow, thin, and too quiet. "Meera," he said. Her name came out rough, like it had been dragged over broken glass. She did not answer. Behind him, Anton, his head of security, swore under his breath. "Boss, she's alive, but barely. We need to move her." Nikolai slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees. She was a full, heavy woman, soft in places the world had taught her to hide, but in his arms she felt terrifyingly fragile. Her head rolled against his chest, and a sound left his throat that made every man in the loading yard go still. It was not anger, not yet. It was something colder, something deeper, the sound of a man realizing that someone had touched what he had failed to protect. Only then did he notice the inside of her coat lining had been torn open. A folded page had been shoved there, hidden with desperate care. Blood had soaked through the paper, blurring most of the words into red shadows. Nikolai reached for it, careful not to loosen his hold on Meera. The paper shook in his hand. He told himself it was the cold. Most of the writing was ruined, but one sentence remained clear enough to read. "I let him despise me because his hatred kept him careless enough to survive." The loading yard blurred around him. For 5 years, Meera Calder had worked beneath his casino counting room, keeping his private ledgers in an office no larger than a pantry. She knew every dollar that moved through his rail yards, every payment hidden inside casino chips, every bribe passed to a city official, every shipment that came in by river when the fog was thick enough to hide a body. She balanced the books of an empire built on fear. She knew the bones beneath the silk suit. And still, Nikolai had treated her like a nuisance with good handwriting. The night before, he had done worse. The masquerade gala had been his annual display of power. Everyone who mattered in Bellather had been there, even the ones who pretended they did not belong to him. Bankers in black masks drank beside smugglers in gold ones. Judges laughed too loudly. City officials kissed cheeks they should have been investigating. Rival families stood near the balcony railings, smiling with their teeth and watching every exit. The old furnace hall glowed with low amber light. Silk dresses whispered against polished floors. Champagne climbed into crystal towers. Above it all, Nikolai Drazzich stood on the main stage beneath an old iron catwalk, ready to announce the alliance that would secure the river city for good. He remembered the room clearly now, every detail turning sharp and cruel in his mind. He had worn a black mask edged in silver. Silas Rowe, his advisor, had stood just below the stage, elegant as always in a cream dinner jacket, speaking softly to a city councilman who owed Nikolai more than his career. A vintage microphone had been placed at center stage because Silas said it would look charming, a little theater for the crowd. Nikolai had barely noticed it. He had been too focused on the men watching from the far tables, the ones whose money and guns would bend after that night. Meera had noticed. She always noticed. At first, he had seen her near the west wall, standing beside a service table with a ledger tucked under one arm. She wore a burgundy gown, the first bright thing he had ever seen her wear. It clung softly to her body, instead of hiding it, and for one strange moment, even through his irritation, Nikolai had stared. The color made her skin look warm against the cold light. Her wide hips filled the dress with quiet grace. Her dark curls had been pinned loosely instead of pulled back. She looked less like the woman who lived under stacks of paper and more like a secret the room was too stupid to understand. Then she began moving. At first, slowly, then faster. Her eyes went from the microphone cable to the floor beneath his shoes, from the floor to the curtains, from the curtains to the technician standing near the side entrance. Nikolai saw the alarm flash across her face, but he mistook it for panic, just as he always did. Meera was always panicking about something, a changed route, a delayed meeting, a missing invoice. A cigar he was not allowed to smoke because she claimed the humidity had ruined the wrapper. A hotel suite she insisted he leave because she did not like the service elevator schedule. She had a talent for appearing at the exact wrong time with a quiet warning that made no sense until after the moment had passed, and he had hated it. He had hated the way she made him feel watched, hated the way her quiet corrections scraped against his authority, hated that she could make him doubt a room simply by looking at a corner too long, hated most of all that whenever he wanted to dismiss her completely, some hidden part of him waited for her opinion. On stage, he had reached for the microphone. Meera had shoved through the crowd. A few people laughed when they saw her coming. Someone's champagne spilled. A masked woman cursed as Meera pushed past her. Meera did not slow down. She climbed the stage steps with her gown caught in one hand, her face pale, her breath sharp. Nikolai turned toward her, anger already rising. He thought she was about to ruin his announcement, and because pride is sometimes louder than instinct, he missed the fear in her eyes. Meera, he had warned softly. She did not explain. She did not ask permission. She threw her shoulder into the microphone stand, knocking it away from his hand, then lunged for the emergency power lever mounted near the old furnace control panel. The hall went black. A violent crack split the air. Sparks burst across the stage, bright enough to burn white shapes behind Nikolai's eyes. The microphone stand convulsed on the floor, spitting blue fire. The crowd screamed. Glass shattered somewhere near the bar. In the dark, Nikolai reached for his gun, not understanding that the death meant for him had already missed. When the emergency lights flickered on, Meera was on her knees near the power lever, breathing hard, one hand pressed to the floor. The crowd stared at her. Some were frightened. Some were angry. Some were amused in that cruel, hungry way rich people become amused when someone smaller than them appears to have failed in public. Nikolai had looked at the fallen microphone. He had looked at the guests. He had looked at Silas, whose face showed perfect concern. Then he had looked at Meera, and instead of asking the right question, he chose the easy one. "What have you done?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. He walked toward her, each step slow and controlled, his fury hidden under the smooth calm that had made stronger men tremble. "Do you understand what this night means?" "Nikolai, You what?" His voice had been low, but everyone heard it. That was the problem with power. When a man like him whispered, the whole room leaned in. "You saw a shadow? You disliked a wire? You felt another one of your little storms coming?" Meera flinched. He remembered that now. He wished he did not. The crowd watched. Silas stepped closer, but did not interrupt. The technician near the curtain was gone. Nikolai had not noticed that either. Meera tried again. The microphone was wrong. A few people laughed. Nikolai's pride burned hotter than the sparks still fading on the floor. "You create chaos wherever you go," he said. "You walk behind me with your books and your warnings and your frightened little guesses, and somehow I am expected to treat them like prophecy." Her face went still. He should have stopped then. Instead, he finished the wound. "You are a burden disguised as an employee." The words landed harder than any slap. The hall fell silent, not because the insult was unusual in their world, but because everyone recognized the coldness in it. Meera lowered her eyes. For a moment, he thought she might cry. She did not. She simply stood, smoothed the torn edge of her gown where it had caught on the stage, and gave him a small nod. "Yes, Mr. Drazzich," she said. "Not Nikolai. Not that night. Mr. Drazzich." Then she walked down from the stage while his enemies watched her leave. Now, standing in the frozen yard with Meera unconscious in his arms, Nikolai felt that memory cut open inside him. The ambulance he had refused to call screamed through the private gate under his own control, staffed by a doctor who owed him too much to ask questions. Nikolai carried Meera himself. No one dared tell him to let go. He held her through the ride, his coat wrapped over her, his hand pressed against her cold fingers, as if his heat could force life back into her body. The burned copper wire lay in a sealed evidence bag beside him. The broken badge sat in Anton's palm. The bloody ledger page remained folded inside Nikolai's inner pocket, close to the heart he had always claimed he did not have. At the private hospital wing, doctors rushed her behind double doors. Nikolai stood outside, still in the clothes from the gala, his cuffs stained with her blood. Bellather's morning had fully arrived by then. The city outside the windows was waking up, unaware that somewhere above the river, a quiet ledger keeper was holding together the fate of its underworld with one faint heartbeat. Hours passed. Men came and went. Anton brought security reports. Silas called 7 times. Nikolai ignored every call. He stood near the window and watched barges move along the grey water below, each one part of the machine he controlled. Rail yards, casinos, shipments, officials, judges, police captains. He had built an empire by seeing what others missed. And Meera had seen more. When the doctor finally came out, his face was careful, too careful. "She'll live," he said, but she was exposed to extreme cold for hours. "She has 2 cracked ribs, a concussion, severe bruising, and deep tissue damage along her wrists. Whoever did this wanted time to do the work for them." Nikolai's voice was almost gentle. "Did they touch her?" The doctor understood the question behind the question and shook his head. "No evidence of that." Some of the death left Nikolai's eyes, not all of it. "Can I see her?" "She may not wake for a while. She will wake better if I am there." The doctor did not argue. Meera looked too small in the hospital bed, which was a strange thought because the world had never allowed her to feel small. It had always made her aware of her size, her softness, the space she took in rooms that wanted women to be thin, quiet, and grateful for crumbs of respect. But under the white blankets, with one side of her face swollen and her cracked glasses resting on the table beside her, she looked like someone who had been carrying a mountain in silence and had finally been crushed beneath it. Nikolai sat beside her. He did not speak at first. He did not know how. Orders came easily to him. Threats came easier. Apologies were a language he had never learned properly, and gratitude felt even more dangerous. So he sat in the dim room while machines whispered around them, and he studied the woman he should have studied years ago. Her hands were ink-stained even beneath the bruises. Her nails were short and practical. A tiny burn marked the side of one finger, probably from the microphone wire. He imagined her in the empty service corridor after he dismissed her, still collecting evidence after he had cut her open in front of everyone. He imagined her reaching into a stranger's jacket for the badge. He imagined the three men finding her there. His jaw tightened until pain sparked near his temple. Late in the afternoon, her lashes fluttered. Nikolai leaned forward instantly. Meera. Her eyes opened only halfway. For a few seconds, she seemed not to know where she was. Then she saw him, and something passed across her face that hurt him more than fear would have. It was exhaustion, not from the beating, not from the cold, from him. "You are safe," he said. Her lips moved. He bent closer. "Do not trust." Her voice was a broken thread. "The men who took off their masks first." Then her eyes drifted shut again. Nikolai stayed frozen beside her bed. The men who took off their masks first. He was back in the furnace hall, the emergency lights returning, Meera leaving, his own anger filling the room like smoke. Then Silas stepping onto the stage. Calm Silas, polished Silas, loyal Silas, who had served as advisor, negotiator, and friend for nearly 10 years. Silas had removed his mask first, a smooth silver wolf slipping from his elegant face. Then the others had followed, his inner circle, his captains, the men who applauded when Nikolai restored order, as if Meera had been the threat and not the wire burning on the floor. Nikolai stood so suddenly the chair scraped backward. Anton was outside the door. "Boss? Find the technician from last night. We're already looking." "Look harder." Anton nodded once. "And Silas?" Nikolai's face gave nothing away. "Tell him I am grieving my embarrassment and do not wish to be disturbed." Anton's eyes sharpened. He understood at once. "Yes, boss." But Nikolai did not go to Silas first. He went to the place Meera had lived more honestly than anywhere else in his empire. Her office beneath the casino counting room was narrow, windowless, and painfully neat. The ceiling pipes clicked with old heat. The walls were lined with shelves of binders labeled in Meera's careful hand. A small electric kettle sat on a side table beside a tin of honeyed tea. There was a cardigan over the back of her chair, dark green, soft from use. He had seen it on her shoulders many times and never once wondered if she wore it because the basement was cold. Nikolai stood in the doorway, suddenly too large for the room. This was where she had spent 5 years protecting him while he called her difficult. This cramped room with old carpet and flickering lights. This little box beneath the noise of his casino, where cash moved above her head all night and men with guns forgot she existed. He searched carefully, not because he was patient, but because Meera was. A woman like her would not hide the truth behind a simple lock. She would place it where arrogance would never look. It took him 23 minutes to find the false panel in the old filing cabinet. Behind it was a black ledger wrapped in oilcloth. No title on the spine, no decoration, just a handwritten label on the first page. Necessary disasters. Nikolai opened it. The first entry was dated 5 years earlier, 3 weeks after Meera had begun working for him. Cancelled rail yard inspection. Official reason given. Missing customs reconciliation. True reason. Upper window reflection on warehouse 6 showed possible rifle scope. Later confirmation. Unknown man left neighboring roof 7 minutes before arrival window. Nikolai read the entry twice. His hand tightened around the page. The next entry. Changed hotel suite at the Marlow. Official reason given. Booking error. True reason. Service vent recently opened. Dust pattern disturbed. Battery residue near ceiling grate. Later confirmation. Device fragments found after room was cleared. Another. Ruined private cigar before meeting with Holden brothers. Official reason given. Tobacco mold. True reason. Sweet chemical smell under wrapper. Inconsistent with aged leaf. Later confirmation. Lab result showed slow toxin. Another. Switched town car for river bridge crossing. Official reason given. Tire pressure irregularity. True reason. Same delivery van seen on 3 previous routes. Driver badge inconsistent. Later confirmation. Police scanner reported abandoned van fire near bridge ramp. Another. Delayed restaurant meeting. Official reason given. Payroll discrepancy. True reason. Kitchen staff changed without notice. Gas line maintenance request forged. Later confirmation. Fire started in kitchen 18 minutes after planned arrival. Page after page. Disaster after disaster. Every irritation. Every delay. Every moment he had thought Meera Calder was making his life harder had been a hand between him and death. By the time he reached the unsent letters tucked into the back cover, the room felt airless. The first letter began with his name and ended without a signature. Meera had written it after he shouted at her for cancelling a meeting he thought mattered. She had not defended herself. She had written instead about how tired she was of saving a man who looked at her as if she were dirt on his shoes. In another, she wrote that she did not hate him, although it would have been easier if she did. She wrote that she loved the hidden pieces of him, the ones he buried so deep most people never saw them. The man who sent money to the families of soldiers who died for him. The man who once ended a business deal because a banker made a joke about her body when he thought Nikolai was not listening. The man who had left a blanket over her shoulders when she fell asleep at her desk, then insulted her filing system the next morning because tenderness frightened him more than guns. Nikolai lowered himself slowly into her chair. The room was silent except for the old pipes and the faint thump of casino music above. He sat there with Meera's letters in his hands and understood, with a clarity that felt like punishment, that she had loved him in the only way she thought she was allowed to, quietly, secretly, without asking for kindness in return. Then his phone buzzed. Anton's message was short. The gala technician is dead, found in the river, badge missing. Payments lead to a shell account tied to Silas Rowe. Nikolai stared at the words until they became very still inside him. When he finally stood, the soft confusion in his face was gone. In its place was the calm, terrible focus that had made Bellather bow. He closed Meera's ledger with care, tucked her letters inside his coat, and turned off the light in her little office. For 5 years, Meera Calder had watched death move toward him from the shadows. Now Nikolai Drazzich was going to turn around and watch it run. For 5 years, Meera Calder had watched death move toward Nikolai Drazzich from the shadows. Now Nikolai was going to turn around and watch it run. He left her office beneath the counting room, with the black ledger tucked under one arm and the unsent letters folded inside his coat, close enough to burn him with every step. Above him, the casino was already waking into its late afternoon disguise. Machines chimed. Cards snapped against green felt. Men in tailored jackets laughed too loudly while women in silk pretended not to notice the armed guards near the doors. Bellather loved pretending. It pretended the river carried grain and coal instead of secrets. It pretended the rail yards moved legal freight. It pretended Nikolai Drazzich was only a businessman with a taste for old buildings and quiet restaurants. It had pretended Meera Calder was only a fat woman with ledgers and lowered eyes. Nikolai was finished with pretending. He walked through the casino floor without slowing, and every conversation around him died. His men fell into step behind him. Anton stayed close, his expression carved from stone. No one asked where they were going. No one asked why Nikolai's face looked so calm. Men who knew violence understood that rage made noise, but true danger became almost gentle. Silas Rowe was waiting in the private glass lounge above the main floor, drinking tea, as if the city belonged to him already. He was elegant in a pale grey suit, his silver hair combed perfectly back, his long fingers resting around a porcelain cup. He looked like a man who had never needed to lift his voice, because other people were always willing to bleed for him. When Nikolai entered, Silas stood with a careful smile. "Nikolai," he said softly, "I came as soon as I heard about poor Meera. Terrible business. The girl was always fragile." Nikolai looked at him for a long moment. In the past, he might have admired the performance. Silas had a gift for making poison sound like concern. Now Nikolai only saw the mask beneath the mask. "Fragile," Nikolai repeated. Silas lowered his eyes with practiced sympathy. "You know I never liked speaking against her, but after last night, perhaps it is time we admit what has been obvious. She was unstable, devoted to you in a way that crossed into obsession. She ruined your speech, humiliated you in front of allies, and then wandered off drunk or ashamed. Whoever harmed her may have taken advantage of that confusion." Anton shifted slightly, but Nikolai lifted one hand and stopped him. Silas kept speaking, mistaking silence for permission. "The council is worried. Rivals are already whispering. I can call an emergency meeting at the Lyric Furnace tonight. We calm the room, we explain that Meera acted alone, and we make sure no one uses this embarrassment against you." There it was, the shape of the trap, clean, polished, wrapped in loyalty. Silas wanted the room where it had begun. He wanted the same witnesses, the same stage, the same public humiliation turned into a final burial. He wanted Meera painted as a foolish, lonely woman who invented danger because she wanted to matter. Nikolai stepped closer. Silas did not move, but a small unease flickered behind his eyes. "Call the meeting," Nikolai said. Relief moved across Silas's face so quickly, most men would have missed it. Meera would not have. Nikolai hated himself for the thought, and treasured it at the same time. "Tonight?" Silas asked. "Tonight? And Meera?" Nikolai's gaze sharpened. "Meera is under my protection." Silas gave a faint, pitying smile. "Of course. Though perhaps it would be better if she remained unseen until we know what story she plans to tell." Nikolai leaned in just enough for Silas to smell the danger on him. The next person who calls her a story will have his tongue removed before he finishes the sentence. Silas went still. Then Nikolai smiled. It was not warm. It was not even cruel. It was the smile of a man holding open a door and waiting for a fool to walk through. "Call the meeting," he said again. "Invite everyone who wore a mask last night." By evening, the Lyric Furnace was lit once more, but the magic had changed. The chandeliers still glowed above the old iron beams. The black marble floor still reflected the amber light. The stage still stood at the center of the hall, but the ruined microphone was gone, leaving only a clean circle of empty space where death had tried and failed to stand. Around the room, the most dangerous people in Bellather gathered in uneasy silence. Bankers, smugglers, casino owners, railmen, councilmen, judges, captains and killers. Some wore no masks tonight. Some did, perhaps out of habit, perhaps because cowardice liked decoration. Silas stood near the stage, calm and shining. He spoke with small groups, touched shoulders, lowered his voice. He was building his version of the truth before Nikolai arrived. Meera was unstable. Meera was obsessed. Meera wanted importance. Meera had staged threats. Meera had shamed a powerful man because she could not accept being unseen. The room accepted the poison easily. It always did. People liked stories that made cruelty feel reasonable. Then the back doors opened. Nikolai entered first, dressed in black, his face expressionless, his presence dragging silence behind him like a blade. But the room did not truly change until they saw the woman walking beside him. Meera Calder moved slowly, one hand resting lightly on Nikolai's arm, not because he owned her, but because cracked ribs made every breath a private battle. Her face was bruised, her lip was split. One side of her jaw carried the dark bloom of violence. She wore no mask. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, and over her bandaged wrist, she wore the torn burgundy gown from the night before, cleaned and repaired only enough to hold together. She had refused the new dress Nikolai offered. She said the room should see what had been done to her. She said beauty did not need to arrive unbroken. Nikolai had not argued. A whisper moved through the hall, then another. Meera heard them. Of course she did. She had spent a lifetime hearing what people thought was quiet. Fat, poor thing, desperate, loyal dog, foolish woman. Some were shocked she was alive. Some looked irritated that she had ruined the neatness of their evening. Silas looked at her with soft concern so perfect it almost seemed holy. "Meera," he said, stepping forward, "you should be resting." She looked at him through her cracked glasses, which she had insisted on wearing even though Nikolai had offered to replace them. "I rested long enough in the truck." The words landed softly, but the room felt them. Nikolai guided her to the stage. He did not pull, he did not hurry her. Each step cost her, and he let the room watch the price. When they reached the center, he turned to face his empire. "Last night," Silas began smoothly, trying to take control before Nikolai could speak, "we all witnessed an unfortunate episode. Miss Calder, in a state of confusion, interrupted an important announcement and caused a panic. Later, she was attacked by men who may have believed she knew sensitive details about this organization. Her devotion to Nikolai has always been intense, and while we should show compassion, we must also show discipline." Meera's fingers tightened once around Nikolai's sleeve, not in fear, in warning. Nikolai let Silas continue. "She has kept private notes," Silas said, his voice gentle now, almost sorrowful. "Notes that appear to show a pattern of interference. Cancelled routes, altered rooms, ruined meetings. One might call them protection. One might also call them obsession. I believe Meera wanted to be necessary. I believe she created dangers, then solved them, because she could not bear being only a ledger keeper." A few heads nodded. A few eyes slid toward Meera's body with quiet, ugly judgment. Silas felt the room leaning his way and pressed harder. "And now," he said, "she will claim she did all of it for love. But love, when twisted by loneliness, can become a very dangerous thing." Meera closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she looked tired, hurt, and utterly awake. Nikolai stepped forward. "Enough." The word was quiet, but the room obeyed. Anton placed a metal evidence case on the stage. Nikolai opened it himself. One by one, he laid out the objects under the chandelier light: the burned copper wire, the broken false badge, photographs of the altered floor panel, payment transfers from shell accounts, technician lists with forged approvals, route changes tied to bribed guards, security footage showing Silas's private driver meeting the missing technician 2 nights before the gala, then the black ledger. Silas's face changed by a fraction. Nikolai saw it. So did Meera. "For 5 years," Nikolai said, "I believed Meera Calder made disasters. I believed she cancelled my meetings because she feared shadows. I believed she changed my routes because she did not understand power. I believed she interrupted me because she was too small in spirit to trust my judgment." His voice roughened slightly, but he did not look away from the room. I was wrong. No one moved. Nikolai lifted the ledger. A cancelled rail inspection saved me from a sniper. A changed hotel room saved me from a bomb. A ruined cigar saved me from poison. A switched car saved me from a bridge ambush. A delayed meeting saved me from a staged kitchen fire. Last night she saved me from a microphone wired to kill me in front of every person here. Silas laughed once, softly. Convenient records. Written by the same woman who wants you to believe she is indispensable. Meera stepped away from Nikolai. Pain flashed across her face, but she stayed upright. No, she said. I wanted him to never find them. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Something about it made the room lean closer. I kept that ledger because I knew one day someone would decide I was easier to erase than to understand. I kept it because numbers do not care what I weigh. Dates do not laugh at me. Routes do not call me lonely. Payments do not pretend they cannot see me until they need something fixed. Silas's jaw tightened. Meera, this is exactly the instability I feared. She turned to him fully. You feared me because I saw you. A hush settled. Meera took another breath, shallow and painful, but steady. You used men who thought I was background. Technicians who handed me receipts without looking at my face. Guards who spoke near me because they forgot I had ears. Accountants who hid payments in columns. They assumed I was too tired to check. You thought a fat woman with a ledger could not be dangerous. You thought if people laughed at me, I would become too ashamed to notice anything else. Her bruised mouth curved into something almost like a smile. You were wrong. I was not invisible. I was watching. For the first time that night, Silas lost the room. Nikolai saw the shift. Fear changed direction. It moved away from Meera and turned toward the elegant man in the pale suit. Silas tried one final time. She loved you, Nikolai. Ask her that. Ask her if this noble little performance is not just the work of a woman desperate to be chosen. Meera's face paled, but she did not retreat. Yes, she said. I loved him. The room stirred. Nikolai's chest tightened. Meera looked at him then, not gently, not sweetly, but honestly. I loved him when he was cruel. I loved pieces of him I found under the cruelty. That was my mistake, not my crime. Then she faced the room again. Loving Nikolai did not make me sabotage his life. It made me notice when death was being placed in his path. And if that makes me foolish, then I am a foolish woman who kept the most feared man in Bellather breathing while all of you toasted his arrogance and missed the wire beneath his feet. The silence after that was almost beautiful. Silas moved first. His hand slid toward the inside of his jacket. He never reached the gun. Anton struck him from behind, fast and clean, forcing him to his knees. Two guards seized his arms. A small silver pistol clattered across the stage and spun to a stop near Meera's shoes. She looked down at it, then up at Silas. He was breathing hard now, his face red beneath its polished calm. You think this ends with me? Silas spat. You think she will make you stronger? She will make you weak. Look at you, Nikolai, standing beside her, like guilt has made you soft. Nikolai walked to him slowly. No, he said. Guilt made me honest. He crouched until he was eye level with the man he had once trusted. You tried to kill me. That was ambition. You tried to kill her. That was stupidity. Silas was dragged away through the side doors, still cursing, still claiming the city would rot without him. No one moved to help him. In Bellather, loyalty often had the lifespan of a match flame. When the doors shut, Nikolai turned back to the room. Every eye was on him. He reached for Meera's hand, then stopped before touching her. The pause was small, but Meera noticed. He was asking without words. She gave him her hand because she chose to, not because he took it. This woman protected me while I punished her for it, Nikolai said. Every disaster she caused was a warning I was too arrogant to read. Every insult I gave her was a debt I cannot repay in front of witnesses. but you will all hear this much. Meera Calder is not my burden. She is not my shame. She is not my quiet employee in the basement. She is the reason I am alive." Meera's eyes shone, but she did not cry. Nikolai looked at her then, and the whole room seemed to fade. "And I am sorry." Those 4 words cost him more than any territory he had ever surrendered. But Meera did not fall into his arms. She did not forgive him because the room had gone silent and his voice had broken in the right places. Public truth could not erase private damage. A confession could open a door, but it could not rebuild the house. When the meeting ended, Nikolai offered her everything he knew how to offer. A higher position, full authority over security and finance, an office above ground with windows, a staff, a title, a seat beside him at every table. Meera listened from a chair near the empty bar, her face pale with exhaustion. Then she said, "No." Nikolai went very still. "I will not come back because you finally discovered I was useful," she said. "I will not live in the same walls where I was only valuable after I bled." His hand curled once at his side, not in anger at her, but at himself. "Meera." "No," she said again, softer this time. "You do not get to protect me by putting me back in the cage that hurt me, even if you polish it, even if you put windows in it." He wanted to argue. The instinct rose in him, old and powerful. He wanted to tell her it was dangerous outside his reach. He wanted to say the city still had teeth. He wanted to lock every door between her and the world. But for once, Nikolai heard what she had not said. Protecting someone did not mean owning them. So he nodded. Meera left the casino 3 days later and moved into a quiet apartment above an old bookshop on Alder Street, where the river fog softened the windows each morning, and the owner downstairs made cinnamon coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The apartment was small, with uneven floors, brass doorknobs, and shelves already built into the walls. It smelled faintly of paper, rain, and dust. Meera liked it immediately. It asked nothing of her. Nikolai paid for the building's security without telling her, then told her when she asked directly, because he was learning. She made him reduce it from 8 men to 2. He hated that. He did it anyway. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale. Meera healed slowly. Some mornings her ribs ached so badly she had to sit on the edge of the bed and breathe until the pain softened. Some nights she woke from dreams of metal walls and freezing air, her hands searching for a wire that was no longer there. Nikolai came when she allowed him. Sometimes he brought dinner, sometimes tea with too much honey, until she finally told him she liked only 1 spoonful, not 6. Sometimes he sat across from her in the bookshop after closing while she read, and he pretended not to stare. He learned the shape of her life without taking it over. He learned she hated casino smoke, and the way men lowered their voices when women entered rooms. He learned she loved red dresses because she had spent too long dressing like a shadow. He learned she did not want to be called strong when people meant they were glad she survived pain they should never have allowed. He learned she liked quiet mornings, old mystery novels, honeyed tea, fresh peaches, warm socks, and being asked before being touched. Most of all, he learned that guilt was not romance. There were days he failed, days his voice sharpened too quickly, days his fear for her sounded too much like command. Meera did not reward the effort simply because he was trying. When he overstepped, she told him. When he apologized badly, she made him do it again. When he sent a driver without asking, she sent the driver back with a book called Listening for Beginners and a note inside that said, "Start here." Nikolai kept the book. He read it twice. Bellather changed around them. Silas's allies vanished, confessed or begged. The rail yards came under tighter control. The corrupt officials who had sold information found themselves suddenly unemployed, exiled, or too frightened to speak above a whisper. The underworld learned a new rule. Meera Calder was not to be mocked, touched, followed, threatened, or underestimated. Not because Nikolai Drazzich would burn the city for her, though everyone knew he would, but because Meera herself had become a warning. A woman who could remember 5 years of murder attempts by invoice number was not a woman to cross carelessly. Yet Meera did not return to the counting room. Instead, she began building something of her own. A private risk office above the bookshop, with 3 desks, 2 clerks she personally trained, and a red door Nikolai was not allowed to enter without knocking. She took clients who needed patterns found, lies untangled, and dangerous men told no before they ruined themselves. Some were legitimate, some were not. Meera chose carefully. For the first time in years, her mind belonged to her. Nikolai watched her become brighter when she was no longer shrinking to survive him. That hurt. It also made him love her better. One morning, almost 2 months after the gala, Meera sent him a message. "Walk with me today." No explanation, no softness, just the invitation. He arrived at Alder Street within 15 minutes, then waited outside another 10 because arriving too quickly felt like pressure, and he had learned enough to know that. When Meera came down, she wore a deep red dress beneath a black coat, her hair loose, her glasses repaired, her steps steadier than they had been in weeks. Nikolai forgot, for a dangerous second, how to breathe. "Where are we going?" he asked. "The lyric furnace." His body tensed before he could stop it. Meera saw, "Not inside." So they drove in silence to the old loading yard behind the factory. The refrigerated truck was gone. The blood had been washed from the concrete. Morning light filled the empty space, soft and gold, touching the brick walls and the old steel doors as if the place had never known fear at all. Meera walked to the spot where he had found her and stopped. Nikolai stayed beside her, not behind, not ahead. For a while, neither spoke. Then Nikolai reached into his coat and took out the ring. It was not enormous. It was not made to impress a room. A warm oval stone set in dark gold, deep red when the light touched it. He held it in his palm, but did not kneel. Meera looked at it, then at him. "Before you ask, I have questions." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I expected no less. Do you want to marry me because I saved your life? No. Because you feel guilty? No. Because it makes the story cleaner after what Silas said?" His face tightened. "No." She studied him, careful and searching. "Then why?" Nikolai looked out toward the river, then back at her. He had ruled rooms full of killers without fear, but this answer made his voice quiet. "I loved you before I understood what you sacrificed," he said. Badly, proudly. In pieces I did not know what to do with. I loved the way the room steadied when you entered it. I loved that you corrected me even when you were afraid. I loved your mind before I was wise enough to honor it. I loved your courage before I knew how much of it I was asking you to spend. I loved your softness, your anger, your body, your patience, and the woman you became when you stopped making yourself small enough for my pride. Meera's eyes filled slowly. Nikolai stepped closer, then stopped, letting her choose the final distance. "Gratitude is what I owe you," he said. "Love is what I choose. And if you never marry me, I will still spend the rest of my life making sure my world never makes you small again." The loading yard was quiet around them. No music, no masks, no applause. Only the river wind and the truth. Meera looked at the ring again. "If I say yes, I will never stand behind you again. Not as an employee, not as a shield, not as the keeper of secrets you are too proud to hear. I know. I will not be managed. I know. I will not be called difficult when I am saving you from your own arrogance." His mouth curved. "You may call me arrogant first, if it helps. It often will. Then I accept." She breathed out, and something inside her seemed to loosen at last. Not all of it. Some wounds did not vanish because love arrived with a ring, but they could heal in honest air. They could heal where no one demanded silence as proof of loyalty. Nikolai lowered himself to one knee then, not because the performance required it, but because she had finished questioning him. He held up the ring. "Meera Calder," he said, his voice rough with all the things he had learned too late and still meant with everything he had left. "Will you marry me as my equal? Not because you saved me, not because I need you, but because I love you." Meera looked down at him, this feared man kneeling on the same concrete where he had once found her broken, and for the first time in years, she did not feel like a secret. "Yes," she said. Then she let him slide the ring onto her finger. Nikolai rose slowly. His hand trembled when it touched her face, not from weakness, but from restraint, from reverence, from knowing she was not something he had won, but someone who had chosen him with clear eyes. Meera leaned into his touch for one heartbeat. Then she lifted a finger and tapped the center of his chest. "But if you ever mistake my care for weakness again, I will not cut the power next time." His eyes warmed. "No? No," she said, her mouth curving at last. "I will burn the whole room down." Nikolai laughed then, a low, rare sound that startled a pair of pigeons from the roofline. He drew her close, slowly enough for her to stop him if she wished. She did not. She stepped into his arms, and when he kissed her, it was not a claim made in front of enemies, or a promise sharpened by guilt. It was quiet, careful, certain, a kiss with morning light around it, a kiss with no masks left between them. When they left the loading yard, they walked side by side. Behind them stood the place where Meera had nearly died because she refused to betray the truth. Ahead of them waited Bellather, with its river fog, iron bridges, hidden ledgers, and dangerous men who would now think twice before laughing at a woman who watched too closely. For 5 years, Meera Calder had kept Nikolai Drazzich alive by letting herself be misunderstood. She had carried his secrets, caught his enemies, and swallowed his cruelty because the world had taught her that quiet women survived longer. But she was quiet no longer. Nikolai finally understood what everyone else had missed. The strongest person in his empire had never been the man with the guns, the rail yards, the casinos, or the city officials in his pocket. It had been the woman in the dark dress, with ink on her fingers, fire in her heart, and a ledger full of disasters that were never disasters at all. The first mistake Vivian Ashford made was believing that fear belonged to her. For years, the staff of Belladonna House had lowered their eyes when she entered a room, swallowed their anger when she smiled, and thanked her for small mercies she never meant to give. She moved through the cliffside hotel like a woman who had already won a crown, elegant in pale silk, sharp perfume, and quiet threats. Nobody raised their voice to her. Nobody corrected her. Nobody dared tell her that cruelty was not the same thing as power. Then Maribel Cruz walked into the kitchen with a suitcase in one hand, a worn leather recipe book in the other, and the calm look of a woman who had survived too much to be impressed by someone else's performance. Belladonna House sat high above the grey Atlantic, built into a rocky stretch of coast, where the wind sounded like a warning even on clear days. From the road, it looked like the kind of private hotel where old money came to disappear for a weekend. Its windows were tall and dark. Its gardens were trimmed with quiet care. Its front doors were carved from black wood so heavy that they seemed more like gates than an entrance. Wealthy guests arrived in silent cars with tinted windows, stepped out in wool coats and diamonds, and never asked why armed men stood near the side doors. They came for privacy, for service, and for the promise that anything said inside those walls would stay there. Maribel saw all of it before she even reached the lobby. She saw the cameras tucked beneath the stone ledges. She saw the guard near the fountain pretending to check his phone while watching the road. She saw the polished silence in the doorman's face when he opened the door for her, the kind of silence that came from being paid well enough to obey and scared enough not to wonder. Maribel had worked in enough kitchens to know the smell of fear. It was different from stress. Stress moved fast. Fear stayed still. It hid in clean uniforms, careful voices, and hands that stopped moving whenever the wrong person entered the room. She was 37 years old, broad through the hips, soft through the belly, strong in the arms, and long past the age where she apologized for taking up space. Life had tried to make her smaller in many different ways. Men had looked past her. Customers had spoken over her. Bank officers had smiled politely while denying her loans. Even her former business partner, Lydia, had smiled like a sister while stealing every dollar from their small catering company and vanishing before dawn. That betrayal had nearly broken Maribel, not because of the money alone, but because the business had been hers in the way a heartbeat was hers. Every menu, every sauce, every handwritten invoice, every late night at the stove had carried her name, even when the sign outside carried too. So when the agency offered her a temporary kitchen supervisor position at Belladonna House, Maribel accepted because rent did not care about pride. She told herself it would be simple. She would organize the kitchen, calm the staff, feed rich people, and save enough money to start again. She did not yet know that the hotel belonged to Dante Moretti, a man whose name changed the air in a room. She knew the rumors, of course. Everyone on the coast knew some version of them. Dante owned restaurants, shipping companies, real estate, charities, and maybe judges. Men who crossed him lost businesses, memories, or the ability to sleep with the lights off. But rumors had never cooked a meal, and fear had never paid Maribel's bills. The kitchen was already in motion when she arrived. It was long, hot, and beautiful, in a severe kind of way, with steel counters, copper pans, white tile, and windows that looked out toward the restless water below the cliffs. A dozen staff members moved through the space with the careful speed of people trying not to make a sound. Nobody laughed. Nobody teased. Nobody cursed when they burned a finger or dropped a spoon. A kitchen without noise was not a kitchen to Maribel. It was a cage with knives in it. The head chef had left 2 weeks earlier, according to the agency file. Burnout, the note had said. Maribel only needed 1 hour inside Belladonna House to know that burnout was a gentle word for whatever had really happened. The sous chef, a thin young man named Eli, gave her a fast tour without meeting her eyes. He showed her the dry storage, the walk-in cooler, the pastry station, the staff exit, and the clipboard where banquet changes were supposed to be recorded. His voice stayed careful. His hands stayed busy. When Maribel asked who approved menu changes, Eli's throat moved before he answered. "Miss Ashford," he said. Maribel looked up from the clipboard. "And Miss Ashford is the general manager?" "No." "The owner?" "No." "Chef?" "No." Maribel waited. Eli lowered his voice. "She is Mr. Moretti's fiancée." That explained the silence more than any official title could have. Maribel had met women like Vivienne before. Not in mafia hotels, maybe, but in restaurants, offices, churches, weddings, and charity boards. Women who lived close to power but did not own it, so they borrowed it in ugly little pieces. They learned where people were tender. They smiled before cutting. They never shouted unless they had already made sure the room would blame someone else for the noise. Maribel was checking the produce order when Vivian entered the kitchen for the first time. The air changed before anyone spoke. The dishwasher stopped stacking plates. A prep cook wiped the same clean counter 3 times. Eli straightened so quickly he nearly knocked over a bowl of lemons. Vivian Ashford stood in the doorway wearing cream-colored trousers, a soft blue blouse, and earrings that glittered every time she tilted her head. She was beautiful in a way that looked practiced, every strand of hair placed with purpose, every smile measured before being offered. Her eyes moved across the kitchen and stopped on Maribel. For 1 slow second, Vivian studied her body, not her face, not the agency badge clipped to her jacket, her body, the soft width of her, the curve of her arms, the way her black work pants held firm over her hips instead of trying to hide them. Maribel knew that look. She had been given that look in clothing stores, at interviews, in restaurants, on sidewalks, and once by a doctor who had not asked a single question before deciding he understood her whole life. "You must be the temporary supervisor," Vivienne said. "Maribel Cruz." Vivienne's smile sharpened. "Yes, the caterer." There was a small pause after the word, caterer, as if it were something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Maribel wiped her hands on a towel and held out one hand. "That's right." Vivienne looked at the hand just long enough for the insult to bloom, then turned away without taking it. "Dinner service begins at 7. We have 12 private guests, 4 security tables, and Mr. Moretti may dine upstairs if his meeting ends early. You'll want to make sure the food is graceful." Maribel folded the towel and laid it on the counter. Food can be balanced, warm, clean, rich, simple, careful, or beautiful. Graceful depends on who is eating. A few eyes flicked up across the kitchen. Vivienne's smile did not move, but something behind it went still. "How charming. I was told you were confident. I was told this kitchen needed help." For the first time, Vivienne looked directly into Maribel's eyes. The look was cool, almost curious, as if she had found a bug on a white tablecloth and had not yet decided whether to crush it. Then she laughed softly. "We all help in different ways here," Vivienne said. "You will learn that." She left the kitchen with the same quiet control she had brought into it. No doors slammed, no orders were shouted. Still, the whole room exhaled when she disappeared. Maribel turned back to the clipboard. "Does she always inspect the kitchen like that?" Nobody answered. That told her enough. By evening, the hotel seemed to glow from inside. Fires burned in stone hearths. Crystal glasses caught the light. Guests murmured in low voices behind closed dining room doors, while the ocean beat against the cliffs below. The kitchen finally found a rhythm under Maribel's hands. She did not yell. She did not rush people into mistakes. She tasted sauces, checked plates, fixed timing, and asked questions that made the staff nervous at first because they were not used to being asked anything. By the second hour, the fear in the room had loosened just a little. A line cook named Rosa smiled when Maribel saved a split cream sauce. Tomas, the elderly dishwasher with silver hair and kind eyes, whispered a blessing over the clean stack of plates when Maribel helped him lift them. His right wrist was wrapped in a beige brace. Maribel noticed that too. "You shouldn't be carrying full racks with that wrist," she said. Tomas gave her a tired smile. "It is not so bad. That means it is bad." He glanced toward the door. "I manage." Before Maribel could answer, Vivienne returned. This time she carried a small black notebook and the sweet, bright scent of expensive perfume. She moved straight to the wine crates near the service hall, where several bottles had just been delivered from the cellar for the private dining room. Her eyes settled on Tomas. "You," she said. "Take that crate to the West Room." Tomas looked at the crate. It was large and packed with dark glass bottles, each one expensive enough to cover a month of groceries. "Miss Ashford, I can ask Matteo to help. My wrist is still—" "I did not ask for your medical history," Vivienne said gently. That was the worst part, Maribel thought. The gentleness. The guests are waiting. Tomas swallowed and stepped forward. Maribel moved at the same time. "I'll have one of the stronger staff carry it." Vivienne did not look at her. "I gave an instruction." "And I heard it," Maribel said. "It's unsafe." Now the whole kitchen went silent. Not quiet, silent. Even the burners seemed to lower themselves. Vivienne slowly turned. "Excuse me?" Maribel kept her voice level. "His wrist is injured. That crate is heavy. If he drops it, someone gets hurt, and the wine is gone anyway. Let Matteo carry it." Tomas shook his head slightly, his eyes pleading with her to stop. But Maribel had spent too many years watching good people pay for someone else's pride. She had watched her own mother come home from restaurant shifts with swollen feet and trembling hands, still saying the boss was not so bad because the rent was due. She had learned early that silence could become a habit so deep people mistook it for peace. Vivian's eyes warmed with false concern. Tomas understands that everyone here does what is needed. Don't you, Tomas? Yes, Miss Ashford, he whispered. He bent, gripped the crate with his good hand and the fingers of his injured one, and lifted. For a moment, he managed. Then pain flashed across his face. His wrist buckled. One corner of the crate dipped. A single bottle slid free, hit the tile and burst open with a sharp, bright crack. Red wine spread across the white floor like a wound. Nobody moved. Vivian looked down at the broken bottle, then at Tomas. Her face did not show anger. It showed satisfaction, neat and cold. That bottle was worth more than your weekly pay, she said. I hope your son's apprenticeship is going well. I would hate for Mr. Moretti's scholarship office to hear that your family does not respect opportunity. Tomas went pale. Maribel felt something inside her go very calm. I broke it, she said. Every face in the kitchen turned to her. Vivian blinked. No, you didn't. I'm the kitchen supervisor. I allowed an unsafe order to continue after I saw the risk. That makes it my responsibility. Vivian's smile thinned. How noble. No, Maribel said, just accurate. The silence deepened. Somewhere beyond the kitchen, a piano played softly for the guests. The music floated through the service hall like it had wandered into the wrong story. Vivian stepped closer. You are new here, Miss Cruz, so I will be kind enough to explain something. Belladonna House runs smoothly because people know their place. Maribel looked at the broken glass, then back at her. Places change. A small sound came from one of the prep cooks, half gasp, half prayer. Vivian's cheeks flushed. It was slight, almost nothing, but Maribel saw it. Women like Vivian hated public resistance because it gave other people a dangerous idea. It reminded them that the monster in the room still had skin. You think this is bravery? Vivian asked. You think taking blame for a dishwasher makes you important? No, Maribel said. I think threatening his son over a bottle of wine makes you small. The words landed softly, but they landed everywhere. Above the dining room, behind a carved balcony screen, Dante Moretti heard them. He had stepped out of a private meeting only moments before, tired of men who used long speeches to hide simple greed. He had been crossing the upper gallery when the quiet tension below caught his attention. From where he stood, he could see part of the service hall through the open arch. He saw Vivian first, pale and polished, exactly as the world expected her to be. Then he saw the new woman standing across from her. Maribel Cruz did not look like anyone usually invited into Dante's private world. She was not fragile. She was not painted into some delicate shape for men to admire. She stood with both feet planted, shoulders relaxed, chin steady, her body full and warm and certain beneath her black kitchen jacket. Dante watched her speak to his fiancé without trembling, not loudly, not foolishly, just without fear. That caught him more sharply than beauty ever had. People feared Dante before they loved him, before they hated him, before they knew him at all. Fear arrived first. It entered rooms ahead of him and cleaned the floor. Even men who wanted his favor looked at him like he was a loaded gun resting on a table. Vivian looked at him like a prize she meant to display. His lieutenants looked at him like law. But when Maribel glanced up and saw him standing in the balcony shadow, her eyes did not widen with worship or panic. She looked at him as if he were simply a man who had overheard something he should have noticed sooner. Then she looked away first. The small act should not have mattered. It did. Dante remained still while Vivian ordered the mess cleaned and left the kitchen with her head high, though her steps were quicker than before. He watched Maribel kneel beside Tomas, not to make a show of kindness, but to check his wrist. She spoke softly to him. Tomas shook his head. She touched his shoulder once, firm and reassuring, then stood and began directing the cleanup. Within minutes, the kitchen moved again. Not perfectly, not happily, but with a little less terror than before. Dante did not go down. That was another mistake, though he did not know it yet. By midnight, everyone at Belladonna House knew that the new kitchen supervisor had challenged Vivian Ashford and survived the first hour afterward. Stories moved through staff halls faster than official orders. Rosa told Matteo near the pantry. Matteo told 2 housekeepers by the back stairs. The housekeepers told the night clerk, and the night clerk repeated it to a valet who had once seen Vivian make a grown man cry over a missing umbrella. By morning, Maribel's name had become a whispered thing. Not loud enough to be dangerous, not yet, but enough to make people look at her differently when she poured coffee in the staff room. Vivian noticed. She noticed everything that threatened the shape of her world. She noticed Thomas smiling when Maribel adjusted his schedule so his wrist could rest. She noticed Eli asking Maribel for approval before checking with her. She noticed Dante's gaze drifting toward the kitchen doors during breakfast, though he said nothing, and his face gave away even less. Most of all, she noticed that Maribel did not bend. So Vivian began softly. She changed the flour luncheon count from 30 to 50 and sent the update to the wrong clipboard. Maribel found the mismatch before service and stretched the menu without complaint. Vivian switched the dessert order for a private card game, replacing chocolate tarts with lemon cakes requested by no one. Maribel checked the original guest notes, caught the change, and plated both options as if it had been planned from the beginning. Vivian told a wealthy guest that Maribel had forgotten his low-salt meal. Maribel produced the written request, the prep note, and the finished dish under a silver cover, warm and perfect. She did not accuse Vivian. She did not roll her eyes. She did not give the staff a speech. She simply kept records. Every order was copied. Every receipt was saved. Every change was dated and placed in a folder she kept in a locked drawer near the spice shelves. By the 3rd day, the kitchen staff had begun slipping her small notes without being asked. A missing invoice, a changed schedule, a warning that Vivian had searched the employee lockers after midnight. Fear was still in the hotel, but now it had a place to go. Dante watched from a distance longer than he should have. He told himself Maribel interested him because she was useful. The hotel ran better with her there. The staff made fewer mistakes. Meals left the kitchen on time. Guests praised the food. Even his men, who usually ate like wolves in silence, began lingering over staff dinners because Maribel insisted that food tasted better when people sat down long enough to remember they were human. But usefulness did not explain why he paused outside the kitchen one evening and listened to her laugh. It was a low, warm sound, brief but real. Dante stood in the hall with 2 guards behind him and felt something in his chest shift in a way he did not trust. Through the open doorway, Maribel was showing Rosa how to fold dough for empanadas, her sleeves pushed up, her hands dusted with flour. She was telling a story about a wedding cake that had collapsed during a summer storm and how she had saved it with toothpicks, whipped cream, and lies told confidently enough to become truth. The staff laughed softly. Even Thomas, seated at a prep table with his wrapped wrist resting on a towel, smiled. Then Dante stepped into the doorway, and the laughter died. He hated how fast it happened. Maribel looked up. She saw the room freeze around him. She saw his jaw tighten as he noticed it too. Then, instead of dropping her eyes, she lifted one brow. "Are you hungry?" she asked, "or just haunting the hallway?" One of his guards made a strangled sound. Dante stared at her. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he laughed once, quietly, like the sound had escaped before he could decide whether to allow it. "I was passing by," he said. "People who are passing by usually keep walking." His gaze dropped to the flour on her hands, then returned to her face. and people who value their jobs usually speak carefully to me. Maribel picked up a towel and wiped her fingers. I am speaking carefully. Something almost like amusement moved across his mouth. This is careful? This is very careful. The kitchen stayed frozen, waiting for punishment. Dante could feel it. He could feel the old machine of his life around him, built from obedience and consequence. A word from him could have ended her job. A look could have made every person in that kitchen afraid to stand near her. For years, he had accepted that kind of power as natural. Tonight, under Maribel's steady gaze, it felt suddenly cheap. I came to thank you, he said. Maribel's expression changed only a little. For dinner? For protecting Tomas? Tomas looked down quickly. Maribel held Dante's gaze. He should not have needed protection from anyone in your house. The words were quiet, but every person in the kitchen heard them. Dante felt them more than heard them. They touched a place in him that anger usually guarded. He could have answered with pride. He could have reminded her whose roof she stood under. Instead, he looked around the kitchen and saw what she saw, the careful eyes, the stiff backs. The people waiting to learn which version of him had arrived. You blame me, he said. I don't know you well enough to blame you, Maribel answered, but I know this place learned fear from somewhere. The hallway seemed to darken around him. Dante's guards shifted, uncomfortable with the silence. Maribel did not move. Her body stayed relaxed, strong, grounded, as if she had already decided that whatever he did next would reveal more about him than it would about her. Dante should have disliked her. Instead, he wanted to hear every honest thing she had ever been warned not to say. Before he could answer, Vivienne appeared at the far end of the hall. She stopped when she saw them together, Dante in the kitchen doorway, and Maribel standing in flower and calm defiance. For a heartbeat, her face opened. Not fully. Just enough for Maribel to see the fear beneath the anger. Then Vivienne smiled. There you are, Dante, she said, her voice light and smooth. Everyone is waiting in the East Lounge. Dante did not look away from Maribel immediately. When he finally turned, Vivienne's smile had tightened at the corners. I'll be there, he said. Vivienne slipped her hand through his arm, as if claiming him in front of the room. Dante allowed it, but his gaze drifted once more to Maribel before he left. That small glance was all Vivienne needed. By the next afternoon, the real war began. It did not arrive with shouting or broken glass. It came folded into banquet instructions, hidden in polite notes, tucked inside changed delivery times and missing inventory. A private charity dinner was scheduled for the following evening, an elegant event for politicians, donors, business owners, and men whose names were never printed beside their real work. Vivienne took charge of the guest list herself. She floated through the hotel with bright eyes and a soft voice, praising the staff so sweetly that they became more afraid than if she had screamed. Maribel reviewed every menu twice. One guest had a severe almond allergy. Another could not eat shellfish. A senator wanted no pork on his plate for reasons that changed depending on who was asking. Dante's inner circle would be seated near the west windows. Vivienne wanted the dessert served with edible gold. The charity director wanted white roses. The whole event had the delicate, expensive feel of something designed less to help people and more to prove who belonged at the table. Late that night, long after the staff dinner had ended, Maribel stayed in the kitchen alone. The ocean wind pressed against the windows. The hotel above her had gone soft and quiet, but not peaceful. Belladonna House was never peaceful. It listened in its sleep. Maribel sat at the small desk near dry storage, comparing the final printed menu with the handwritten notes she had copied earlier. Her feet ached. Her shoulders were tight. A half-cold cup of coffee sat beside her elbow. She was almost finished when she noticed one page had been replaced. It was a small thing, a different weight of paper, a cleaner fold, a line of text that looked right, unless someone had trained herself to distrust easy answers. The almond allergy had been moved from the first guest to another name. Maribel stared at the page for a long moment. Then she reached into her locked drawer and pulled out the original copy. Her pulse did not race. Her hands did not shake. The fear that moved through her was quiet and cold, not for herself, but for the guest who might have taken one bite and never drawn another breath. Vivienne had played with jobs. She had played with money. She had played with shame. Now she was playing near death, and trusting that everyone would be too scared to notice. Maribel looked toward the dark service hall. Somewhere above her, music drifted faintly from Dante's private floor. Somewhere beyond the windows, waves broke against the rocks with a sound like distant applause. Maribel placed both pages side by side, took a photo of them, and locked the originals away. Then she stood, turned off the desk lamp, and whispered into the sleeping kitchen, "All right, Miss Ashford. Now I see you." By sunrise, Maribel Cruz had already changed the order of the kitchen, without raising her voice once. She moved through Belladonna House with the same calm face she had worn the night before, but something behind her eyes had sharpened. The staff felt it before they understood it. Rosa noticed that Maribel checked every sealed container by hand. Eli noticed that she asked for fresh copies of the guest list from 3 different departments. Tomas noticed that she kept her recipe book open beside the allergy folder, not because she needed the recipes, but because it gave her a reason to stay near the desk where the locked drawer waited. Nobody asked questions, not out loud. They had all lived under Vivienne's quiet punishments long enough to recognize the start of a storm. The charity banquet began under a soft pink sky, with the last light of evening spilling over the cliff and turning the windows of Belladonna House into sheets of fire. Inside, everything looked perfect. White roses climbed the staircase. Candles glowed along the walls. Guests arrived in pearls, dark suits, and practiced smiles. They spoke about children's hospitals, education funds, and public service, while Dante Moretti's guards watched from the edges of the room, like shadows with breathing patterns. Vivienne stood near the entrance in silver silk, greeting donors as if she had been born to own every room she entered. She laughed at the right moments. She touched Dante's sleeve whenever someone important passed. Her ring caught the light each time she lifted her hand, a bright, cold reminder of the future she believed was already secured. Maribel watched from the kitchen doors. She had seen people like Vivienne turn kindness into theater before. A warm smile for guests, a soft threat for workers, a public hand on Dante's arm, a private knife in someone else's back. It did not make Maribel angry in the loud way. Loud anger burned too quickly and made mistakes. What she felt now was quieter and more dangerous. She felt certain. The first courses moved smoothly. Soup, salad, warm bread, small plates arranged like art. The kitchen worked fast, but not frantically. Maribel stood at the pass and checked every dish before it left her station. Twice, Vivienne sent messages changing table timing. Twice, Maribel confirmed the original request and adjusted without letting the staff panic. Dante sat at the main table beside Vivienne, speaking little, watching much. Several times, his gaze drifted toward the kitchen. Each time, Maribel felt it without turning around. He was no longer only curious, he was listening. That was useful. A man like Dante had spent years being feared, but listening was something fear had never taught him. The danger came with the fish course. A young server named Nina carried the plate toward a heavy-set councilman seated near the center of the room. He was the guest with the almond allergy, though the altered page in Vivienne's folder said otherwise. The dish looked harmless, delicate white fish over vegetables with a pale sauce shining beneath it, but Maribel knew the sauce. She knew the scent of toasted almond oil even when someone tried to bury it under lemon and butter. "Nina," Maribel said. The girl stopped at once. Maribel walked out from behind the service station and took the plate from her hands. The room did not go silent immediately. It quieted in little waves as guests noticed a kitchen supervisor standing in the banquet hall, holding a dish that was already meant to be served. Vivian's smile froze. Maribel turned to the councilman. "Sir, I need to confirm your allergy before this plate reaches your table." The man blinked. "Almonds. Severe." A small sound moved through the guests. Someone whispered. Someone else set down a glass. Maribel nodded. "Then this dish cannot be served to you." Vivian stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. How strange. That was not on the final sheet. "It was on the original sheet," Maribel said. Vivian gave a light laugh, just sweet enough to poison the air. "Then perhaps someone in the kitchen is having trouble managing the paperwork." Maribel looked at her. "Perhaps." Dante stood slowly from the main table. The movement was not dramatic, but the room felt it. Every guard became still. Every guest seemed to remember at once whose hotel this was. Vivian turned toward him before he could speak, her face arranged into wounded concern. "Dante, this is exactly what I was afraid of. I did not want to upset you during the event, but there have been problems in the kitchen all week. Missing receipts, incorrect orders, staff confusion. I tried to handle it privately." Maribel said nothing. Vivian's voice softened. "I think Miss Cruz has been creating drama to make herself seem important." The old Maribel, the one who had lost her business because she trusted a partner who smiled while stealing from her, might have defended herself too quickly. She might have poured out every receipt and every note in a rush, desperate to be believed. But this Maribel had learned. Truth needed timing. A good source could be ruined by heat too early, and a lie could be exposed by waiting until the liar believed she had won. Dante's eyes moved from Vivian to Maribel. "Is that true?" Maribel held the plate steady. "No." Vivian's smile turned sad. Of course she would say that. Then she looked toward security. "Search her room." The words struck the staff harder than the guests. Rosa went pale. Eli's hand tightened around the edge of a tray. Tomas lowered his eyes with a grief that made Maribel's chest ache. They all knew what that meant. A room search at Belladonna House was never only a search. It was a sentence looking for evidence. Dante did not immediately agree. His jaw had gone hard. "Why?" Vivian stepped closer to him, lowering her voice enough to seem private, while still allowing the nearby tables to hear. "Because my diamond brooch is missing, the one your mother gave me for the engagement dinner. I did not want to accuse anyone, but after this dangerous mistake, I think we must be careful." There it was, the final shape of the trap. Dante looked at Maribel. Something flickered in his face. Not doubt exactly, but anger that he had been placed inside a performance in front of his own people. Maribel set the plate down on a side table. "Search it," Rosa whispered. "Maribel," but Maribel only shook her head once. Two guards left the hall. The wait felt longer than it was. Guests shifted in their seats. Vivian stayed close to Dante, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Maribel stood alone near the service doors, broad, calm, and steady under the weight of every stare. She felt the old familiar looks trying to land on her body, trying to make her feel foolish for taking up space in a room built for silk and thin smiles. She let them look. Her body had carried grief, work, hunger, heat, debt, family, and survival. It could carry a room's judgment for a few more minutes. When the guards returned, one of them held a small velvet pouch. Vivian covered her mouth. "Oh no." The guard opened it. The diamond brooch flashed under the chandelier light. A murmur rolled through the room. Vivian closed her eyes as if the discovery pained her deeply. It was a beautiful performance. Maribel almost admired the discipline of it. Dante's voice dropped. "Where was it?" "In Miss Cruz's suitcase," the guard said. Vivian turned to Maribel with tears bright in her eyes. "Why would you do this, after I tried to help you settle in?" That was when Maribel smiled. Not happily, not cruelly, just enough. "You had access to employee rooms last night," she said. Vivian's tears vanished for half a second. "Excuse me? You searched the lockers after midnight earlier this week. Staff saw you. You also changed banquet instructions and blamed the kitchen when we corrected them. That can be proven." Vivian gave a soft, shaking laugh. "This is absurd." "The brooch was supposedly stolen during afternoon setup," Maribel continued. "At that time, I was in the kitchen for more than 2 hours, on camera, with 6 staff members and 2 security feeds showing me at the prep table." Dante's gaze sharpened. Vivian looked toward the guests, trying to pull sympathy from the room. "She is inventing this because she was caught." Maribel took one step forward. "No. I am saying you planted a brooch in my suitcase because the allergy change did not work." Vivian's face changed. It happened so quickly that some people missed it, but Maribel saw the mask crack, the soft mouth tightened, the eyes hardened, the beautiful wounded woman disappeared, and something raw stepped forward in her place. "You arrogant kitchen woman," Vivian hissed. The room heard it. All of it. Dante's head turned slowly toward her. Vivian realized the mistake and tried to recover, but anger had her now. It had lived too long behind her teeth. "You think because you make people feel sorry for you, you can walk into my home and take what is mine." Maribel's voice stayed even. "This is not your home." That was the sentence that broke her. Vivian grabbed the nearest serving tray from a side table. It was large, heavy, silver, and still wet with spilled champagne. She swung it with both hands toward Maribel's face. Gasps burst across the hall. A guard moved, but Maribel moved first. She caught Vivian's wrist before the tray could land, twisted hard enough to loosen her grip, and pulled the tray away as if taking a pan from a careless child. Vivian stumbled, wild with rage and shock. Maribel shoved her back. Vivian crashed into the champagne display behind her. Glass towers folded in a bright, glittering collapse. Bottles burst. Flowers flew. Champagne spread across the floor in golden streams, while Vivian fell among shattered stems and broken crystal, her silver silk ruined, her perfect hair loosened around her furious face. The room went completely silent. Dante stepped between his guards and Maribel before they could touch her. "Stop," he said. "One word. Absolute." The guards froze. Dante looked at Maribel, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked less like a legend and more like a man standing in the wreckage of his own blindness. "Tell me," he said. So Maribel did. She told him about Tomas and the broken bottle. She told him about changed orders, missing receipts, searched rooms, stolen tips, false complaints, and staff fired because Vivian had decided they were no longer useful. She told him about the allergy sheet, the replaced page, the brooch, and the fear that moved through Belladonna House because everyone believed Dante would protect the woman causing it. Vivian tried to interrupt from the floor, but Dante did not look at her. Maribel's final words were the quietest. Her power did not come from courage. It did not come from intelligence. It came from your refusal to pay attention. No public insult had ever cut Dante like that. Men had threatened him, cursed him, betrayed him, and begged him. None of it had reached the place Maribel's words reached, because she was right. He had built an empire on control, and then failed to see what was happening under his own roof. He had mistaken silence for order. He had mistaken fear for loyalty. He had given Vivian space to be cruel, because her cruelty had never inconvenienced him. He turned to his security chief. "Pull the kitchen records, the employee room logs, and every camera feed from yesterday and today. Now." Vivian struggled to stand, wet with champagne and shaking with rage. "Dante, do not humiliate me like this." He looked at her then. "You did this yourself." The proof came quickly because Maribel had made sure it would. The access logs showed Vivian entering the employee wing. The camera showed Maribel in the kitchen when the brooch vanished. The printed sheets carried 2 different timestamps. The final copy had come from Vivian's private office. By the time the guests began leaving in stiff, shocked silence, the story had already changed. Maribel was not the thief. She was not the mistake. She was the woman who had stood still long enough for the truth to reveal itself. Vivian waited until the last important guest left before she tried one final time. "You need me," she told Dante, standing near the ruined flowers. "You need what my family name gives you. You need my connections. You cannot throw me away over kitchen gossip." Dante removed the engagement ring from her finger himself, not roughly, not gently, like closing a door. "You are removed from every property connected to me," he said. "Your accounts are frozen until my lawyers separate what is yours from what you took. The employees you harmed will be repaid. The ones you had dismissed will be contacted and offered their positions back." Vivian stared at him as if he had become a stranger. "You would choose her over me." Dante looked once toward Maribel. She stood near Tomas, making sure his chair was steady. Her dark hair loosened from the heat of the kitchen, her face tired but unbowed. "No," Dante said. "I am choosing to stop being blind." Vivian left Belladonna House before dawn. For a while, the hotel did not know how to breathe without fear. The staff still lowered their voices when footsteps passed. Tomas still flinched when a glass broke. Rosa still asked permission for simple things, as if kindness might be a trick. But little by little, the silence loosened. Meals were shared at the staff table. Tips were returned. Schedules became schedules again instead of weapons. Dante restored jobs, paid debts he had not known were owed, and listened as one employee after another told him what life in his house had become. Maribel stayed cautious. When Dante thanked her in his private office 3 nights later, she did not soften just because his voice did. "Removing one cruel person does not make you good," she told him. Dante stood near the window, the ocean black behind him. "No, the fear was already here. She used it, but you built the walls that held it." He accepted that without anger, which surprised her more than anger would have. After that, Dante changed in ways that made his own men uneasy. He started walking through the working areas, without guards crowding his back. He learned names. He reviewed contracts. He doubled medical coverage after discovering half the staff avoided doctors because unpaid time could ruin them. He stopped his lieutenants from using threats when a fair offer would work. Men who had followed him for years whispered that the kitchen woman had softened him. Dante heard the whispers and let them live. Maribel did not think he was soft. She knew better. Dante Moretti was still dangerous. His enemies still feared his name. His world still carried blood in places no clean tablecloth could hide. But something in him had turned, not away from power, but toward a different shape of it. He began to understand that people protected what they trusted more fiercely than what they feared. Their connection grew in quiet moments, not grand ones. Dante started appearing in the kitchen late at night, not to haunt the hallway, but to sit at the prep table while Maribel worked on menus for her dream of reopening her catering company. He watched her roll dough, taste sauces, and write notes in the leather recipe book she carried everywhere. Sometimes he asked questions. Sometimes he simply listened. Maribel found his silence easier now, less like a weapon and more like a man learning how not to interrupt. She told him about her mother one rainy evening while soup simmered on the stove. Her mother had worked for a restaurant controlled by men who spoke about loyalty like it was holy. When she injured her back lifting crates no one should have made her carry. They sent flowers once and stopped answering her calls. Maribel had cared for her family after that. She had learned to cook because food was the one comfort poverty could not fully steal. She had learned that powerful people often praised loyalty when what they really wanted was obedience. Dante listened with his hands folded on the table. "My father taught me that everyone is replaceable," he said after a long silence. "If people believed they mattered too much, they became dangerous." Maribel stirred the soup. Maybe he built an empire nobody loved. Dante looked at her. "And what would you build?" "Something people would choose to protect." He carried those words with him for weeks. The final test came during a peace dinner at Belladonna House, when Dante's cousin Rocco decided that mercy looked too much like weakness. Rocco had always smiled too easily and watched too closely. He praised Dante in public, but Maribel had seen the impatience in him, the restless hunger of a man who believed he deserved a throne because he had stood near one long enough. He thought Dante had changed because of her. He was right. He thought that made Dante weaker. He was wrong. The dinner was meant to calm tensions between several rival leaders. Maribel supervised the kitchen herself, checking every seal, every bottle, every spice tin. When a rare cooking oil arrived from a supplier she did not recognize, she noticed the broken seal before the delivery boy had even left the service hall. The cap sat just slightly wrong. The scent beneath it carried a bitter edge that did not belong. Rosa saw Maribel's face and reached for the phone. Maribel stopped her. Not yet. Instead, she replaced the bottle with one from her own locked storage, marked the contaminated oil, and hid it behind a flour bin as evidence. Then she let Rocco's men believe the plan was moving forward. For the next hour, she worked with a calm so complete it frightened even her. Plates were prepared, sauces were poured. The false bottle waited untouched. Dante received her warning through Tomas, written on a folded napkin and delivered with coffee. Broken seal, Rocco's supply. Let them think it worked. Dante did not storm the kitchen. He did not drag Rocco outside. He sat at the head of the table, speaking with rival leaders while his security quietly moved through the hotel like a closing net. By the time the main course was served safely, Dante knew which men had touched the delivery, which accounts had paid them, and which cousin had planned to poison half the room and leave Dante buried under the blame. Rocco was exposed after dessert, not with a bullet, not with screaming. Dante stood, placed the contaminated bottle on the table, and told the room exactly what had been planned. He showed the proof. He named the men. Then he looked at Rocco, whose face had gone gray. The old Dante might have made an example out of him in blood. Everyone expected it. Even Rocco expected it, though he tried to hide his shaking hands. But Dante had learned the difference between strength and display. "You wanted them to believe I had lost control," Dante said, "so watch me keep it." Rocco was stripped of his crews, his accounts, and his name inside the family. He was sent into exile before sunrise, alive but finished. His innocent men were not punished. Those who had helped him were removed. Those who had not were given a choice to stay under new terms. The rival leaders left Belladonna House with a different kind of fear in them. Not fear of a man who killed easily, but fear of a man who no longer needed to. Later that night, Dante found Maribel on the terrace. The ocean was dark below the cliffs, and the wind moved through her hair. She had changed out of her kitchen jacket into a deep green sweater that hugged her arms and waist without apology. She looked tired, strong, real in a way that made the rest of the world seem thin and temporary. "You saved my life again," Dante said. Maribel glanced at him. "Your kitchen saved your life. I only paid attention." He stepped beside her, leaving enough space that she could choose whether to close it. That was new too. "I love you," he said. The words were simple. No speech, no command, no promise dressed as ownership. Maribel looked out at the water for a long time. "Dante, I am not asking you to become smaller," he said. "I am not asking you to be quiet. I am not asking you to belong to me like property. I am asking if you will build something with me and keep telling me the truth when I become too proud to see it." She turned to him then, His face held no softness that was false. He was still the feared man of Belladonna House, still dangerous, still marked by everything he had done, but he was also the man who had listened, changed, and chosen control when violence would have been easier. "I will stand beside you," Maribel said, "not behind you, not beneath you. And if you ever use love as another way to control me, I will leave." Dante's mouth curved, not with amusement, but with awe. I would expect nothing less. When he kissed her, it was not a claim. It was an answer. His hands rested at her waist with reverence, holding the full, warm shape of her like something precious and powerful. Maribel kissed him back without shrinking, without hiding, without letting the old voices tell her that women like her were supposed to be grateful for being wanted. She was not grateful. She was choosing. Months later, Belladonna House no longer moved in silence. The staff still respected Dante, and his enemies still spoke his name carefully. But inside the hotel, people laughed again. Tomas's son returned to his apprenticeship. Rosa became a kitchen partner. Eli took charge of training new staff. Maribel reopened cruise catering from the hotel's professional kitchen, not as a desperate woman trying to rebuild what betrayal had stolen, but as an owner with contracts, partners, and her name written boldly on every menu. Guests still came to the Cliffside Hotel seeking privacy. Powerful men still held quiet meetings behind heavy doors. The ocean still struck the rocks below with its endless warning. But the heart of Belladonna House had changed. It was no longer ruled by a woman's cruelty or a man's neglect. It was shaped by the steady hands of someone who had been underestimated for too long and had learned to turn survival into leadership. Maribel Cruz did not transform Dante Moretti by becoming delicate, obedient, or easy to love. She changed him because she refused to shrink. She stood in his kitchen, his hotel, his empire, and finally his heart, with the calm certainty of a woman who knew her own worth. And in a world built to make people afraid, that kind of courage became the most dangerous power of all. The most dangerous man in Chicago did not notice Maribel when she first came to his table. That was the mistake powerful men always made. They saw her wide hips before they saw her eyes. They saw the soft weight of her body before they saw the calm way she counted exits, measured tempers, and listened to lies hiding underneath polite conversation. Inside the Gilded Lily, where judges drank beside criminals and billionaires shook hands with men who could make bodies vanish, Mara had learned that being overlooked was not always a curse. Sometimes it was cover. Sometimes it was survival. But on the night Dante Moretti walked through the gold-trimmed doors, Mara's quiet life behind a white apron began to crack, and every secret she had buried under her new name started breathing again. The Gilded Lily was not the kind of place people found by accident. It sat hidden inside the restored Belmont Hotel in downtown Chicago, behind a velvet curtain, a locked brass door, and a hostess who never smiled unless your name was already on the list. From the street, the hotel looked like old money pretending not to age. Inside, the private supper club glowed with low amber light, polished wood, dark green walls, and chandeliers that made every glass of wine shine like a secret. There was no sign outside, no menu posted near the door, no loud music, no careless laughter, no tourists taking pictures. The people who came here valued silence. They were senators with clean speeches and dirty donors, lawyers who made evidence disappear, developers who bought neighborhoods for the price of a handshake, and criminals who wore custom suits well enough to pass as businessmen. Mara moved through them with a tray balanced on one hand and a practiced softness in her face. She was good at becoming part of the room without asking the room to welcome her. She knew who liked bourbon before dinner, who wanted their steak almost raw, who tipped badly despite owning half the skyline, and who should never be interrupted while speaking. She remembered allergies, mistresses, court dates, fake names, real names, and which guests preferred the back exit. She had been working at the Gilded Lily for almost 3 years, and in all that time, most of the customers had treated her like furniture that could refill water. Her body made that easier for them. Meera was fat, and she had long ago accepted that people built entire stories around that one fact before she ever opened her mouth. To some, she was lazy before she moved. To others, she was harmless before she proved dangerous. Men let their eyes slide over her in that familiar, dismissive way, as if a woman her size could only exist in the background, carrying plates, apologizing for taking up space, and laughing softly at jokes meant to bruise. Women with sharp collarbones and sharper voices sometimes smiled at her with pity so sweet it tasted rotten. Meera had learned to lower her chin, keep her voice pleasant, and let their blindness protect her. But she was not slow. She was never slow. She noticed everything. That Thursday night began with rain whispering against the hotel windows and thunder rolling somewhere beyond the towers. The club was full, but not loud. It was never loud. At table 6, a judge leaned too close to a lobbyist and laughed with fear in his eyes. Near the fireplace, a shipping magnate argued softly with a man who wore no jewelry except a wedding band and carried himself like security cameras offended him. Meera served truffle risotto, black cod, and 3 bottles of French wine old enough to have outlived marriages. Her feet ached inside her black shoes, and the band of her apron pressed into her stomach, but her face stayed calm. "Meera," Simon called from the service station, his voice tight. She looked up from polishing a wine glass. Simon was the floor manager, a thin man with silver hair, nervous hands, and the soul of a rabbit trapped in a room full of wolves. He was staring toward the entrance, as if death itself had just asked for a table. Meera followed his gaze. The room had changed before she saw the man. That was how power worked in places like the Gilded Lily. It moved ahead of a person like cold air before a storm. Conversations thinned. Forks paused. Men who thought they were fearless suddenly found deep interest in their plates. The hostess stood so still she looked painted onto the wall. Dante Moretti had arrived. Everyone in Chicago knew the name, even people who pretended they did not. Dante controlled illegal gambling hidden inside private clubs, construction unions that could stop half the city from building with one phone call, and trucking routes that moved things no honest company listed on paper. He was not loud about his power. He did not need to be. Men like Dante did not threaten in public, because everyone had already heard what happened in private. He walked in wearing a black tailored suit, a charcoal overcoat still shining with rain, and leather gloves so smooth they looked poured over his hands. He was handsome in a cold, severe way, with dark hair, a clean jaw, and eyes that did not wander. His men followed behind him, silent and broad, each one dressed like money and danger had learned to share a closet. Simon swallowed so hard Meera heard it over the soft jazz. "He asked for the corner booth," Simon whispered. "You'll take him." Meera looked at him. "Me? Everyone else is suddenly busy being useless." His eyes flicked toward the kitchen, where 2 waiters had vanished like smoke. "Just serve him. Be quiet. Be perfect. Do not joke. Do not correct him. Do not breathe too loudly if you can avoid it." Meera almost smiled, but Simon looked too close to fainting, so she only nodded. She picked up the leather wine list and walked toward Dante Moretti's table. The corner booth was the most private seat in the club, half hidden by a curved wall of dark wood and tall palms. Dante sat in the center with the ease of a king who had never once asked permission to rule. 2 of his men took the outside edges. Another stood near the wall, watching the room with still, empty eyes. Meera felt the weight of every stare in the club following her as she approached. Some looked amused. Some looked relieved it was not them. One woman at a nearby table let her eyes trail over Meera's body and smirked into her glass. Meera stopped beside the booth and lowered her head just enough to be polite. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to the Gilded Lily. Would you like to begin with wine? Dante did not answer right away. His gaze moved over her with cool, careless assessment. Not hunger, not interest, just judgment, the kind Mara knew well. It started at her face, dropped to the curve of her chest under the white shirt, moved across the wide line of her hips, and returned to her apron as if the cloth had personally disappointed him. One of his men murmured something in Italian, too low for most people to catch. Mara caught it anyway. The dialect was Sicilian, rough around the edges, the kind spoken in kitchens, back rooms, and old family homes where secrets were passed with coffee. Dante answered in the same language, his voice quiet and flat. He called her slow. He called her too large for the narrow space. He said she looked like the kind of woman who would drop the bottle before she poured it. His men smiled. Mara felt the old heat rise under her skin, but she did not move. She had survived worse than a rich criminal with cruel eyes. She had survived men who smiled before they killed. She set the wine list on the table, reached for the bottle Simon had sent over, and began to pour. The booth was narrow. Her hip brushed the edge of the table, just lightly, making one glass tremble against the white cloth. Dante's mouth tightened. He said something else in Sicilian, softer this time, sharper too. Useless, clumsy, a woman made for the back room. Mara placed the bottle down with careful grace. Then she leaned close enough for only Dante and his men to hear her. In flawless Sicilian Italian, she said, only a weak man hides his cruelty behind another language. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt physical. One of Dante's men moved first. His hand slid toward his jacket. Another shifted in the booth, his face hardening. Mara did not step back. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to shake her ribs, but her face stayed still. Fear was allowed, showing it was optional. Dante lifted one gloved hand. His men froze. Slowly, Dante looked up at her again. This time, he did not look at her body first. He looked into her eyes, really looked. Something small and dangerous changed in his face. Contempt did not vanish completely. Men like him did not surrender that fast. But surprise cut through it. Then curiosity. Then something deeper, something that felt less like interest and more like a door unlocking in a dark room. You understand Sicilian, he said in English. I understand enough to know when I'm being insulted. A faint line appeared between his brows. And you thought answering me was wise? No, Mara said. I thought it was honest. One of his men made a low sound of disbelief. Dante did not look away from her. What is your name? Mara Bell. The lie came easily. It always did now. Dante repeated it softly, as if testing the sound. Mara Bell. She waited for the punishment. A complaint to Simon. A threat. A quiet order that would make her disappear before dessert. But Dante only picked up his wineglass and took a slow sip. His eyes stayed on her over the rim. You may continue, he said. So she did. Mara served the table through 3 courses while the whole room pretended not to watch. Dante did not insult her again, but he tested her in smaller ways. He asked about the wine in Italian. She answered in English. He asked for a dish that had not been on the menu in years. She told him the chef could make it if he accepted a slightly different sauce. He gave her the name of an old Sicilian dessert and watched closely as she repeated it back without stumbling. His men grew quieter each time. By the end of the meal, Simon was pale with confusion. The kitchen staff had decided Mara was either blessed or doomed, and Dante Moretti left a tip large enough to pay her rent for 2 months. Mara stared at the money after he was gone and felt no joy at all. She knew men like Dante did not give without marking the place where they had given. Money from a man like him was not a gift. It was a finger pressed lightly against your throat. The next night, he returned. The hostess nearly dropped the reservation book. Simon looked at Mara with the haunted expression of a man watching lightning choose the same tree twice. He asked for you, Simon said. Mara tied her apron tighter. Of course he did. Dante sat in the same booth, wearing another perfect suit and the same unreadable calm. This time he ordered in Italian from the start, not Sicilian, standard Italian, polished and smooth. Mara answered him without missing a beat. His eyes sharpened. He asked about a wine from a small vineyard near Mount Etna. She named the year that had suffered heavy rain and suggested a better bottle. He ordered it. The night after that, he returned again. This time he spoke to her in a rougher dialect, one that would have confused most trained speakers. Mara understood enough to answer, but not perfectly, and she saw the moment he noticed. It did not please him. It fascinated him. He leaned back in the booth, one hand resting near his glass, watching her like she was a puzzle that had begun to solve him back. "You are not from Sicily," he said. "No. Yet you speak like someone who learned from people, not books." "I worked in restaurants," Mara said. "People talk. They talk. You listen. That is usually how service works." His mouth almost moved into a smile. Almost. Over the next week, Dante Moretti became a storm that kept returning to the same window. He came on quiet nights and busy ones. He came with his men, with politicians, with builders, once with a judge who looked ready to crawl under the table. Every visit became a private contest. He ordered rare wines, changed languages without warning, asked for dishes the kitchen had to invent from memory, and watched to see if Mara would bend. She did not. She served him with steady hands. She corrected him when he tried to trap her with a false vintage. She ignored the way his gaze followed her across the room. She ignored the strange pressure in her chest whenever he said her name. But ignoring Dante was harder than ignoring other men. Not because he was handsome, though he was. Not because he was powerful, though the whole room bowed around him without meaning to. It was because he had stopped looking at her like the world did. His eyes no longer dismissed her softness. They studied it, yes, but not with mockery. He watched the way she carried her weight, the way she moved carefully through tight spaces, the way she made herself smaller without ever becoming weak. He noticed when another customer snapped his fingers at her. He noticed when a woman laughed after Mara passed. Once an alderman made a low comment about her needing a wider aisle, and before Mara could pretend not to hear, Dante slowly turned his head. The alderman went quiet at once. Mara hated that a part of her felt protected. She did not want protection from Dante Moretti. Protection was just another form of ownership if it came from the wrong man. Still, his attention grew. One rainy evening, he arrived alone. That was the night Mara felt real fear. No guards sat at the booth. No men stood near the wall. Dante removed his gloves finger by finger and placed them beside the candle. The club seemed to hold its breath around him. Mara approached with a bottle of red wine, aware of Simon watching from the service station like a man preparing to identify a body. "You came without your men," Mara said. Dante looked up. "Do I need them? In here? Probably not. And outside? That depends who wants you dead this week." This time he did smile. It was small, brief, and unsettlingly beautiful. "You notice more than a waitress should." Mara began pouring his wine. "Waitresses notice everything. People just forget we're there. You notice exits." Her hand paused for the smallest moment. Dante saw it. "You notice weapons," he continued softly. "You notice who lies badly and who lies well. You stand with your back near walls. You never let anyone come too close from behind. You speak Sicilian, but not because you took a class. You understand fear, but you do not obey it easily." Mara set the bottle down. "That sounds like a lot to learn from dinner. I learn quickly. So do I." His gaze held hers. The candlelight carved shadows beneath his cheekbones and turned his eyes almost black. "Who are you, Mara Bell?" For one dangerous second, the old name rose inside her like a ghost, pressing its hands against glass. "Marina Sokolov." daughter of a dead man, keeper of stolen numbers, witness to a murder she was never supposed to survive. Mara pushed the name back into the dark place where she kept it locked. "I'm your waitress," she said. Dante leaned back, but his eyes did not soften. "No, you are hiding inside an apron." Mara picked up the wine bottle. Her fingers were steady, but only because she forced them to be. "And you are hiding inside a suit," she said. The air between them changed. It grew quiet and thin. A lesser man might have been offended. Dante only looked more interested, which scared Mara far more. Before he could answer, a crash came from the kitchen hallway. Mara turned sharply. The sound was wrong. Not a dropped pan, not broken glass from a careless busboy. It had weight behind it, a hard, sudden violence. Then came a second sound, softer but worse. A muffled shout cut short. Dante rose from the booth. Across the room, 3 men in dark city inspector jackets stepped through the service entrance. For half a breath, nobody moved. The nearest diners looked annoyed, then confused. Simon hurried forward, already lifting his hands to smooth over the interruption. Mara saw the badge clipped to one man's jacket and knew instantly it was fake. The metal was too clean. The seal was wrong. The man's shoes were wrong too. Heavy, practical, made for running or killing, not inspecting a kitchen. Then one of the men opened his jacket. Mara saw the gun. And on the inside of his wrist, just visible beneath his sleeve, she saw a black tattoo shaped like a crooked crown wrapped in thorns. The room vanished around her. Her breath stopped. Varga. The name did not come as a thought. It came as a wound reopening. Dante's hand moved toward his coat, but the first shot cracked through the gilded lily before he could draw. The candle on his table shattered. Someone screamed. Wine burst across white linen like blood. The world Mara had built out of silence, aprons, and false names split open in a storm of panic. And as Dante Moretti turned toward the gunfire, Mara Bell understood, with cold, perfect terror, that the men had not only come for him. They had brought her past with them. The room vanished around her. Her breath stopped. Varga. The name did not come as a thought. It came as a wound reopening. Dante's hand moved toward his coat, but the first shot cracked through the gilded lily before he could draw. The candle on his table shattered. Someone screamed. Wine burst across white linen like blood. The world Mara had built out of silence. Aprons and false names split open in a storm of panic. And as Dante Moretti turned toward the gunfire, Mara Bell understood with cold, perfect terror that the men had not only come for him, they had brought her past with them. The first attacker fired again, and the mirror behind the bar exploded into glittering pieces. Guests dropped under tables, chairs scraped across the floor, and the soft music kept playing for a few strange seconds, sweet and useless beneath the screaming. Dante moved with terrifying calm. He flipped the heavy table onto its side with one hard push, turning polished wood into cover just as bullets punched into the booth where he had been sitting. Mara fell behind the table with him, her shoulder slamming against the floor, her tray skidding away into the dark. For 1 second, Dante's body covered hers, broad and solid, his hand at the back of her head, pressing her down as glass rained over them. "Stay down," he said. Mara did not stay down. She lifted her head, just enough to look across the room. One attacker was near the service hall. Another had crossed toward the bar. The third was moving straight for Dante, but his eyes were scanning faces too quickly, too carefully. He was not just hunting one man. He was checking the room for someone else. Mara felt the old instinct wake inside her, the one she had buried under polite smiles and tired feet. She knew that kind of search. She had seen it the night her father died, when men came into their apartment with quiet shoes and flat eyes, looking through rooms like they were already empty. Dante grabbed her wrist. "Mara." She looked at him. His dark eyes were sharp, But there was something else there too, not anger, concern. It almost made her laugh, because the idea of Dante Moretti being concerned for a waitress while men shot up a private supper club felt impossible and strangely human. "They're Vargas," she whispered. Dante's face changed. The name meant something to him. Of course it did. In his world, monsters kept lists of other monsters. Before he could ask, the attacker near the kitchen raised his gun. Dante turned, but the angle was wrong. He was trapped by the fallen table, and one of his men was down near the entrance, bleeding across the carpet. Meera saw the dessert cart beside the service station. Flaming cherries, a small silver pan still burning blue and gold over sweet liquor. The kitchen staff had abandoned it in the panic. Meera moved before fear could drag her back. She pushed away from Dante, rolled low behind a chair, and grabbed the long handle of the pan. Heat kissed her fingers. The attacker turned at the movement, his gun swinging toward her. Meera hurled the flaming liquor with everything she had. The burning liquid struck his face and chest in a wild, bright splash. He screamed, dropping his weapon as fire crawled over his collar. Dante was on him before the gun hit the floor. One clean shot, then silence from that side of the room. The second attacker cursed in a language Meera had spent years trying not to remember, Russian, rough and fast. He shouted that the woman was there. The woman, not waitress, not stranger, the woman. Dante heard it too. His eyes snapped to Meera. For the first time since he had walked into the Gilded Lily, he looked truly dangerous. His remaining guard came through the side entrance and fired twice. The attacker near the bar went down hard, crashing through a table of untouched desserts. The last man tried to run toward the service hallway, but Dante moved faster. He caught him near the kitchen doors, slammed him against the wall, and pressed a gun beneath his jaw. The man spat blood and smiled with broken teeth. Meera already knew what he would say before he said it. "Nikolai sends regards," the man hissed. Dante did not blink. "Tell him I received them." The gunshot was quiet compared to the screaming that came after. Then the sirens began, distant at first, then swelling closer through the rain. The room was ruined. The Gilded Lily, with all its velvet secrecy and expensive lies, had been torn open. Meera stood in the middle of broken glass, her apron stained with wine and ash, her hands shaking at her sides. Simon was alive behind the hostess stand, pale as paper. Guests were crawling out from under tables, some crying, some already calling lawyers instead of ambulances. Dante stepped over the fallen attacker and came straight to Meera. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was low, not cruel, not soft either. It was the voice of a man who had just realized the quiet woman in front of him was standing at the center of something much larger than a dinner ambush. Meera swallowed. "I told you." "No," Dante said. "You told me a name." The sirens were louder now. Police would come through the front. Reporters would come after. Statements would be taken. Cameras would be checked. Faces would be matched. And somewhere in the city, if Nikolai Varga did not already know, he would soon learn that the dead accountant's daughter had survived. Dante looked toward the service hallway. "Come with me." Meera took a step back. "No. You stay here. You answer questions. Your face goes on reports. Whoever sent those men will know exactly where you are before sunrise." Her throat tightened. Dante's voice dropped. "You recognize the tattoo." Meera said nothing. He stepped closer, but not enough to trap her. That, more than anything, made her listen. "I am leaving through the service tunnels," he said. "You have one chance to come with me before this room fills with badges and cameras." Meera looked at the front door, where blue and red light had started flashing through rain-streaked glass. She looked at Simon, who stared back at her with fear and apology in his eyes. She looked at the dead men on the floor and saw another floor from another life, another body, another night when she had been too young to stop anything. Then she followed Dante. The service tunnels beneath the Belmont Hotel were older than the club itself. They smelled like damp stone, old steam pipes, and bleach. Dante moved ahead of her with his gun low at his side, his ruined dinner jacket open, his shirt marked with dust and blood that did not seem to be his. Mara hurried behind him, breathing hard, her shoes slipping slightly on the wet floor. She hated that she was afraid. She hated that part of her felt safer behind him. At the end of the tunnel, a black SUV waited in the alley with its headlights off. Dante opened the back door and looked at her. Mara stopped. "If I get in that car, am I a prisoner?" Dante held her gaze. Rain fell between them, silver under the alley light. "If you were my prisoner, Mara, I would lie and tell you no." That answer should not have comforted her. Somehow, it did. She got in. The city slid past the tinted windows in streaks of wet gold and red. Dante sat across from her, silent for the first several minutes. His phone buzzed again and again, but he ignored it. Mara pressed her hands together in her lap, trying to stop the trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving cold fear behind. Her body felt heavy now, not in the familiar way people mocked, but as if every memory she had outrun had climbed onto her shoulders. "You said Varga," Dante said at last. Mara looked out the window. "I said they were his." "How do you know?" She almost lied. She had survived for years by lying well, but tonight the lie felt useless. The tattoo had seen her. The man had called her the woman. The past had found the door. "My name is not Mara Bell," she said. Dante did not move. "It's Marina Sokolov." The silence after her real name felt deeper than the tunnel had. "My father was an accountant," she continued, "not the kind with a quiet office and tax forms. He built financial systems for men who wanted their money to disappear and return clean. Shell companies, hidden accounts, false contracts, bribed officials, judges on payrolls, trucking companies that did not move what their paperwork said they moved. He worked for Nikolai Varga." Dante's jaw tightened at the name. "My father wanted out. He thought if he copied enough records, he could buy our freedom with them. He was wrong. Varga had him killed in our apartment. I was there." Her voice stayed calm, which felt worse than crying. "I hid in the wall space behind the pantry. I heard everything. After they left, I ran. I changed my name. I gained weight on purpose at first, then stopped caring whether it was on purpose or not. Men looking for Marina Sokolov were looking for a frightened young woman from old photographs. They were not looking for a fat waitress who smiled while pouring wine." Dante watched her like every word mattered. "And the records?" he asked. "My father hid pieces everywhere, but the real map was in his head." She finally looked at him. "And in mine. He taught me more than he should have. Account numbers, company names, judges, border routes, false construction firms, which trucking lines carried weapons, which warehouses were used for cash. I don't have everything, but I have enough." The SUV turned off the highway and followed a private road toward the dark shape of the lake. A fortified house appeared beyond black iron gates, its windows glowing against the rain. Dante leaned back, his face unreadable. "Mara," he said, using the false name gently, as if he knew she still needed it. "Do you understand what you are?" She laughed once, bitter and small. "A waitress with very bad luck?" "No." His eyes darkened. "You are the blade Varga left behind because he thought it was too soft to cut him." The lake house was not a home in any warm sense. It was stone, glass, steel, cameras, locked doors, and men with quiet footsteps. But there was heat inside, and dry clothes waiting in a guest room, and a doctor who checked the small burn on Mara's hand without asking questions. Dante did not force her to talk that night. He gave her space, though armed men stood outside her door until morning. Over the next several days, the strange alliance began. At first, Mara expected threats. Instead, Dante gave her a room with a view of the Grey Lake, a secure laptop, and access to files most men would kill to see. He brought her names, and she corrected them. He showed her routes, and she marked the ones Varga would never abandon. He thought like a ruler of streets and unions. Meera thought like a ghost who had lived inside ledgers. Together, they began to see the shape of Varga's empire. It was larger than Dante had known, larger than anyone had known. There were judges who had dismissed cases for cash, inspectors who had signed off on empty warehouses full of hidden weapons, trucking companies that existed only on paper until they were needed at night. Money moved through restaurants, building contracts, charity foundations, and shell firms with clean names and dirty bones. Meera sat at Dante's long table, wearing borrowed sweaters and no apron, drawing lines between names while rain tapped softly against the windows. Dante watched her work. At first, his attention made her uncomfortable. Then it made her angry. Then, slowly, it became something she did not know how to name. He did not interrupt her. He did not soften his voice in that fake way men used when they thought she was fragile. He asked sharp questions and expected sharp answers. When she corrected him, he listened. When one of his men doubted her memory, Dante told him to leave the room before Meera could defend herself. But Meera did defend herself. "I don't need you to scare every man who questions me," she told him one night. Dante was standing by the window, his shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, the lake dark behind him. "No," he said, "you don't." "Then why do it?" "Because I enjoy watching fools learn quickly." Meera tried not to smile. She failed. Something shifted after that. Not suddenly, not like lightning, more like ice cracking under spring water. Dante stopped calling her waitress in that mocking, almost smile way. He started calling her Marina when they spoke of Varga, and Meera when she looked too tired to hold the past. He ordered food without commenting on how much she ate. He noticed when she forgot meals and quietly placed a plate beside her. Once, when she pushed it away out of habit, he said only, "You need fuel to destroy a man," and went back to reading a file. It should not have touched her. It did. On the 5th night, they built the trap. Varga wanted Dante dead because Dante's trucking routes threatened his weapons movement through the Midwest. That much was clear. So Meera gave him bait he could not resist. Through a corrupt city contact she remembered from her father's old records, she let a rumor travel into Varga's network. Dante was moving millions in stolen bearer bonds through an abandoned rail depot south of the city. The shipment would be lightly guarded because the police had been paid to look elsewhere. It was a beautiful lie because it sounded like greed. Varga took it. The rail depot sat under a bruised purple sky, all rusted tracks, broken windows, and weeds pushing through cracked concrete. Dante's men were hidden in the dark long before Varga arrived. So were federal agents and local police, though none of them knew who had sent the evidence package that landed on their desks that morning. Meera waited in a control room above the main floor, with Dante beside her, and a laptop open in front of them. Her hands did not shake this time. "You do not have to face him," Dante said. Meera looked through the dirty glass at the empty depot below. "Yes, I do. He killed your father. I know. That kind of anger makes people careless." Meera turned to him. "I'm not careless, Dante. I'm finished being afraid." He looked at her then, really looked, the way he had after she answered him in Sicilian, but now there was no contempt left, no test, only a fierce, quiet respect that warmed something in her she had thought long dead. The sound of engines rolled in just after midnight. Black cars entered the depot one by one. Men stepped out with guns, scanning the shadows. Then Nikolai Varga appeared. He was older than Meera remembered, but not smaller. Some monsters never became smaller in the mind, even when time carved lines into their faces. He wore a long dark coat and moved with the calm of a man who believed the world had already agreed to fear him. Meera stared down at him through the glass, and for one moment she was 17 again, curled behind a pantry wall, biting her own hand to stay silent while her father begged once, and then never again. Dante's hand found hers. Not gripping, not claiming, just there. Mara breathed. Then she pressed the key. Across the city, files began to send. Bank records, payment trails, photos, smuggling routes, names of judges, names of officers, names of dead men attached to payments Varga thought were buried forever. At the same time, Dante's men sealed every exit, and police lights flashed to life beyond the broken windows. Varga understood too late. Gunfire broke out below, short and brutal, but the trap had already closed. His men scattered and found nowhere to run. Dante moved with his people, not hiding behind them, his gun steady, his voice calm as he gave orders. Mara stayed above until she saw Varga break away toward the old loading platform. Then she went down. She found him near the tracks, one hand pressed to a bleeding wound in his side, his face twisted with disbelief more than pain. He turned when he heard her footsteps. For a second, his eyes passed over her without knowing. She saw the dismissal happen, the quick judgment, the blindness that had hidden her for years. Then recognition came. His face emptied. "Marina," he said. Mara stopped several feet away. Dante appeared behind her, but he did not step in front of her. Varga looked from Dante to Mara and gave a weak, ugly laugh. "This is what became of you?" Mara felt the insult slide over her body and fall uselessly to the ground. "Yes," she said. "This is what became of me. You think you won because you found a powerful man to stand behind?" "No." Mara took one step closer. "I won because you made one mistake." Varga's eyes narrowed. "You thought a frightened girl would stay frightened forever." For once, Nikolai Varga had no answer. The police took him alive. Dante had allowed that, though Mara knew it had cost him. Varga would not disappear into the lake or a basement or some quiet underworld grave. He would live long enough to watch every protected account freeze, every paid judge deny knowing him, every loyal man trade his name for a shorter sentence. He would live long enough to understand that the empire he built had not been destroyed by Dante Moretti's guns. It had been taken apart by the daughter of the accountant he murdered, a woman he had never bothered to look for properly because he had never believed she could become dangerous. By dawn, the rain had stopped. Mara stood outside the depot wrapped in Dante's coat, watching federal cars pull away with boxes of evidence. The sky over Chicago was turning pale, soft blue pushing through the last of the storm clouds. She was exhausted. Her feet hurt. Her hand still ached from the burn. Her heart felt bruised but strangely light, like a locked room inside her had finally opened and let air in. Dante came to stand beside her. "You can go anywhere now," he said. Mara looked at him. "Is that your way of setting me free?" His mouth curved faintly. "You were never going to accept anything less." She looked back at the city. For years, she had dreamed of freedom as distance. A new name, a new job, a smaller life, somewhere quiet enough that no one would notice her. But now that the fear was gone, or at least changed, the idea of disappearing felt less like safety and more like another kind of prison. "The gilded lily won't take me back," she said. "I bought it this morning." Mara turned to him slowly. "You what?" It seemed poorly managed. For the first time in days, Mara laughed, really laughed. The sound surprised her. It surprised Dante too, though he tried to hide it. He stepped closer, his expression growing serious again. "I am not offering you a club, Mara, and I am not offering you a cage. I am offering you a place beside me, not behind me, not beneath me, beside me." The wind moved softly between them. "I have enemies," he said. "So will you. I have blood on my hands. You know that. I will not pretend to be gentle because you deserve the truth more than pretty lies." Mara studied him, the feared Mafia Boss, the cold man in the perfect suit, the cruel stranger who had insulted her body in another language. and somehow become the only person in the room willing to see her whole. He was not safe in the way ordinary people meant safe, but Mara had learned that ordinary safety could vanish in a single night. Dante was dangerous, yes, but he was honest about his danger. "And what would I be?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "My strategist, my partner, the mind my enemies never see coming." Mara looked down at herself, at the stained hem of her borrowed clothes, at the body she had once used as camouflage, at the hands that had carried plates and secrets and grief. She thought of every person who had looked past her, every customer who had mocked her, every man who believed softness meant weakness, every monster who mistook silence for surrender. Then she looked at Dante. "I make my own decisions," she said. "I know." "I don't belong to you." "No," he said softly, "but I would be honored if you stood with me." That was the moment Mara knew her old life had truly ended. Not when the guns fired, not when Varga was taken away, not when Dante offered her power. It ended when she realized she no longer wanted to hide from being seen. Weeks later, the Gilded Lily reopened under new ownership. The velvet curtains remained. The chandeliers still glowed. Politicians, billionaires, judges and criminals still came through the hidden brass door, but the air inside had changed. People spoke more carefully now. They looked toward the woman seated at the private corner booth beside Dante Moretti, dressed in deep blue silk, tailored to her full body, her hair pinned back, her eyes calm and bright with secrets. Some recognized the waitress she had been. Most did not know what to do with that memory. Mara enjoyed watching them try. Dante sat beside her, silent and watchful, but no longer the only dangerous person at the table. Men came to him with problems, and more often than not, it was Mara who answered. She knew which judge could be pressured, which route was exposed, which account was lying, which smile was fake, and which enemy was already halfway beaten before he sat down. She was no decoration, no rescued woman, no soft thing placed in a chair to be admired. She was the map-maker of an empire. And when powerful men looked at Mara Bell and saw only her body, she smiled, because she knew something they did not. Her body had carried her through hunger, fear, grief, hiding, survival, and war. It had never been her weakness. It had been the place where her courage lived. Once, the world had taught her to make herself small. Now the world made room. And beside Dante Moretti, beneath the golden lights of the Gilded Lily, Mara Bell finally stopped disappearing. The old Bellather Opera House had survived fires, bankrupt owners, ghost stories, and one murder nobody in the city liked to talk about. But on the night Molly Johnston walked through its service entrance carrying an antique wedding gown over one tired arm, the building was holding a secret more dangerous than all of them. Somewhere beyond the velvet curtains and gold-painted balconies, powerful men were bidding on things that had no business being sold in public, and one quiet, fat seamstress from the wrong side of town was about to be mistaken for someone important. It should have been a small mistake. A badge handed to the wrong woman. A name skipped on a clipboard. A door opened when it should have stayed closed. But in certain rooms, one mistake can pull a person out of an invisible life and place her directly in the path of a man everyone else was afraid to look at for too long. Molly Johnston knew how to move through places without asking the world to make space for her. She had learned it young, first in crowded school hallways where boys made jokes under their breath, then in thrift stores where saleswomen looked at her body before they looked at her face, then in the tiny back room of Bellamy Bridal, where she spent most of her evenings sewing beauty onto other women while wearing clothes that had given up on trying to be pretty. She was 30 years old, practical, heavy, tired in a way that sleep did not fix, and so used to being underestimated that she had almost stopped noticing the exact moment it happened. Almost. She still noticed. She noticed when brides forgot her name after she saved their impossible gowns. She noticed when mothers of the bride said things like, "You must be so good with your hands," in the same voice people used for children. She noticed when rich women stepped around her in the fitting room, half dressed in silk and lace, as if Molly were not a person, but a padded chair placed there for convenience. The back room of Bellamy Bridal always smelled like steamed fabric, old coffee, and panic. It was a narrow little space with cracked tile, yellow light, and racks of gowns packed so tightly together that the sleeves brushed Molly's shoulders whenever she walked by. The shop itself had once been lovely, or at least Molly liked to imagine it had been. There were faded photos on the wall of smiling brides from 20 years ago, back when the neighborhood had better foot traffic and people still came in to browse instead of ordering cheap dresses online and crying when they arrived looking nothing like the picture. Now the front window had a crack running through the corner, the carpet was worn flat near the mirror, and the owner, Mrs. Bellamy, spent more time arguing with landlords than selling dresses. Molly did what she could. She replaced beads one by one. She took in bodices, let out seams, repaired old lace, reshaped thrifted gowns into something soft and glowing. She made miracles with aching fingers and cheap thread because nobody else could afford to make miracles anymore. That evening, rain tapped against the alley window while Molly leaned over an antique gown spread across her work table. It was ivory satin, yellowed slightly with age, with a high lace collar and tiny pearl buttons running down the back. The kind of gown that looked innocent until you touched it and understood how much money had once been stitched into every inch. The bodice had torn along one side, the old thread giving way after decades of silence. Molly had repaired it so carefully that even she had to tilt the fabric under the light to find where the damage had been. She was proud of that. She did not say it out loud, because pride felt risky when you were used to people correcting you for having too much of anything, but she felt it all the same. The gown was beautiful again because of her hands. Mrs. Bellamy burst into the back room with her coat half on and her phone pressed to her ear. Her face had that pinched look it got when rent was mentioned. She mouthed sorry at Molly, then snapped into the phone, "It will be there tonight." "I said it will be there." She ended the call and turned toward Molly with a smile too bright to be real. "Tiny problem." Molly looked down at the gown, then up at her boss. "How tiny?" "Bellather Opera House tiny." Molly closed her eyes for a second. "No. Molly, please. Their courier never showed. The gown has to be delivered before the auction preview starts. It belongs to some private collector who could buy this entire block and turn it into a parking garage if she felt moody. I would go myself, but I have to meet the landlord in 20 minutes and convince him not to change the locks before Monday." Molly wanted to refuse. Her feet hurt, her back hurt, and the rain had turned the street outside into black glass. She had planned to go home, heat up soup, and maybe sketch dress ideas she would probably never have the money to make. But then Mrs. Bellamy looked toward the front of the shop, where the lights flickered over empty racks, and Molly felt the familiar weight of a failing place resting on her shoulders. It was not fair, but fairness had never paid a bill. "Fine," Molly said, already reaching for the garment bag. "Service entrance, drop it off, get a signature, come back." Mrs. Bellamy exhaled like Molly had pulled her from a river. "You are saving my life." Molly smiled a little, tired and dry. "I do that a lot for people who still call me Millie." The trip across the city took longer than it should have. The bus was late, then crowded, then stuck behind a delivery truck with its hazard lights blinking like a warning. Molly stood near the rear door, with the garment bag held high to keep it away from wet coats and careless elbows. She felt every stare, real or imagined. Her plain black dress clung in the damp air, her worn flats rubbed the backs of her heels, and the gown bag was heavy enough to pull at her shoulder. By the time she reached the old theater district, the rain had softened into mist, blurring the street lamps and turning the opera house into something from a dream that did not promise to be kind. Bellather Opera House rose at the end of the block, like a grand old queen who had lost her crown, but not her pride. Its stone front was stained by time, its carved angels dark with rain, its windows glowing gold behind red velvet drapes. Black cars lined the curb. Men in long coats opened doors for women wearing diamonds at their throats, and expressions that made it clear they had never checked the price of eggs. Molly stood across the street for a moment, clutching the gown, feeling very aware of the run in her tights and the cheap umbrella folded in her purse. She reminded herself that she was not there to belong. Belonging was not part of the job. Deliver the gown, get the signature, leave. The service entrance was tucked down a narrow side passage near the stage door, watched by 2 security guards in dark suits. One of them was arguing into a headset. The other held out his hand without looking at her. Name: Molly Johnston, Bellamy Bridal. I have the repaired veil gown. He scanned a tablet, frowning. Behind him, someone called his name sharply. Another guard rushed over with a stack of badges and a clipboard. The hallway beyond the door was full of movement, staff carrying crates, caterers balancing trays, men with earpieces speaking in low voices. The guard muttered something, took the garment bag, then slapped a black badge into Molly's hand. Main hall, west aisle. Keep moving. Molly looked down. The badge had a gold strip across it, and a number printed beneath a name she did not recognize. Wait, I think this is wrong. I'm just delivering the gown. But the guard had already turned away, speaking urgently into his headset. A woman in a black blazer appeared behind Molly and waved her forward. You're blocking the entrance, ma'am. Go inside. I'm not supposed to. Inside, please. And just like that, Molly Johnston was pushed through a door she had never been meant to enter. The main hall of the Bellather Opera House was so beautiful it made her chest ache. The ceiling rose above her in a painted dome of clouds and fading stars. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm light over red seats, marble columns, and balconies lined with gold. The stage had been transformed into an auction floor, with glass cases arranged beneath soft lamps. Jewels glittered like trapped fire. Paintings leaned on velvet stands. Old costumes stood on headless forms, silent and eerie, like ghosts dressed for one last performance. The air smelled of champagne, perfume, old wood, and money. Not ordinary money. Ancient money. Money that had learned to speak softly because it knew everyone else would listen. Molly moved along the aisle with her head slightly lowered, trying not to touch anything. She felt too large, too plain, too real in that room of polished surfaces. The women around her seemed carved out of expensive restraint, all sharp collarbones, smooth hair, and dresses that whispered when they moved. The men wore tuxedos and watches worth more than Molly's building. Nobody looked comfortable, exactly, but they all looked practiced. They knew how to stand, how to smile, how to hold a glass without needing it. Molly knew how to sew hooks onto satin, so a bride could breathe through a ceremony. It did not feel like the same language. She tried to find the west aisle, or someone official, or any possible path back toward the side door, but the crowd shifted around her and carried her farther in. A server passed with champagne. Molly stepped aside and bumped lightly into a display rope. A woman nearby looked her over, slowly, with the kind of smile that was not a smile at all. Molly felt heat rise in her face. She tightened her hand around the badge and told herself not to panic. She had survived worse rooms than this. Rooms did not have to welcome you for you to walk through them. Then the opera house changed. It was not loud. No one announced anything. The music did not stop. But something in the room tightened. Laughter lowered. Conversations thinned. Men who had been leaning casually near the bar straightened without meaning to. 2 security guards near the stage looked away too quickly, which somehow made it clear that they had seen exactly who had arrived. Molly turned before she could stop herself. Roberto Salieri entered through the center doors, as if the building had opened for him alone. He was not the tallest man in the room, not the flashiest, not the one wearing the brightest watch or the loudest suit. He did not need any of that. He wore black evening clothes cut so perfectly they made everyone else look overdressed. His dark hair was brushed back from a face too calm to be gentle, and his eyes moved over the room with quiet, exact patience. He was handsome in a way that felt less like beauty and more like danger given a human shape. Two men walked behind him, both broad and silent, but Molly barely noticed them. Everyone else seemed to measure their breathing around him. She knew his name. Everyone in the city knew his name, though most people pretended they did not. Roberto Salieri, head of the Salieri family. Old money, new violence, shipping companies, restaurants, construction contracts, missing witnesses, charity galas. A man who appeared in society pages beside governors and museum directors, and in whispered stories beside men who were never found again. Molly had heard brides talk about him while standing in front of mirrors, their voices excited and afraid. She had heard Mrs. Bellamy lower her voice once when a Salieri account paid in cash. He was the kind of man who made powerful people remember their manners. Molly looked away quickly, embarrassed by the simple act of noticing him. A man like that did not exist in her world except as rumor. She had no reason to care where he stood or what he saw, but a moment later she felt something strange across the back of her neck, a slow awareness, like the air had warmed behind her. She glanced up despite herself. Roberto Salieri was looking at her, not past her. Not through her, at her. The shock of it made Molly forget how to breathe. His gaze was not rude, not openly hungry, not mocking in the way men sometimes looked at her when they wanted her to know she had been judged. It was focused, curious, almost still, as if, in a room full of people dressed as power, he had found the only person who had accidentally brought the truth with her. Molly turned away first. Her pulse bumped hard beneath her skin. She told herself he was probably wondering why a seamstress had been released into the main hall like a confused house cat. She almost made it to the side of the stage before Victor Sloane found her. Molly did not know his name at first. She only knew the type. Men like Victor had appeared in fitting rooms her whole life, usually as fathers paying for gowns or fiancés bored by the process. They wore their money like permission. He was silver-haired, broad through the middle, loud in a velvet jacket the color of wine. Two younger men stood with him, laughing at something he had said. A woman with diamonds in her ears watched from beside him with a bored little smile. Victor's eyes dropped to Molly's badge, then to her dress, then to her body. His mouth curled. "Well, this is generous of them," he said, loudly enough for the nearby guests to hear. Bellather used to have standards. Now they're letting anyone wander in from the alley. Molly stopped. She should have kept walking. She knew that. People like Victor did not want an answer. They wanted a reaction. She could feel the old training rise inside her, the quiet survival habit of shrinking her voice before her body could be used against her. She took one step to the side. Victor moved with her. "Tell me, sweetheart, are you here to fix the gowns or sample the catering?" The small circle around him went quiet in the worst possible way. Not kind quiet, waiting quiet, watching quiet. Molly felt the words hit the softest parts of her, old bruises under new skin. Her throat tightened, and for one bright, awful second, she was not 30 years old in an opera house. She was 13 in a cafeteria. She was 22 in a department store. She was every version of herself that had learned the safest answer was silence. "I'm making a delivery," she said softly. Victor laughed. "Of course you are." Molly's fingers tightened around the edge of the badge until it bent. She looked toward the nearest exit and forced her feet to move. She would leave. She would not cry. She would not give these people the little show they wanted. She had swallowed insults her whole life. One more, would not kill her. Then a quiet voice said, "Apologize." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Molly turned slowly. Roberto Salieri stood beside her, close enough that she could see the fine texture of his black jacket and the faint scar near his left eyebrow. He was not looking at Molly now. He was looking at Victor. Every person nearby had gone perfectly still. Victor's smile struggled to stay alive. "Roberto, I was only making a joke." "No," Roberto said. His voice was low, smooth, almost gentle. "You were making a mistake." The air changed again. Only this time Molly was inside the center of it. She could feel people watching her, watching him, watching Victor decide how foolish he wanted to be. Victor gave another thin laugh and lifted his champagne glass. "Come now, I meant no harm. I'm sure she understands." Roberto did not move. "I said apologize." Victor's face reddened. The woman beside him looked down into her drink. One of the younger men with him suddenly became interested in the carpet. Molly stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She wanted to tell Roberto not to bother. She wanted to tell him this was not worth whatever came next. But his expression gave her the strange feeling that he had not stepped in because he thought she was helpless. He had stepped in because something improper had happened in front of him, and he refused to let the room pretend it had not. Victor swallowed. His hand trembled slightly around the glass. "My apologies," he said, the words stiff and bitter. Roberto's gaze sharpened. Victor turned toward Molly, and the effort looked painful. "I apologize. That was rude of me." Molly did not know what to do with the apology. It sat between them like a strange object. She had received fake apologies before, the kind people gave when they were caught, but never with an entire room standing silent around her, never because someone powerful had decided her dignity mattered. Her voice came out low. "Thank you." Roberto finally looked at her again. There was no triumph in his face, only that same quiet focus, now touched by something she could not name. "Are you leaving, Miss Johnston?" Her stomach dropped. "You know my name." His eyes flicked briefly to the badge in her hand, then back to her face. Not from that. She should have been afraid. She was afraid. But beneath the fear was curiosity, bright and dangerous as a match struck in a dark room. "I'm supposed to be leaving," she said. "Supposed to," he repeated, as if tasting the weakness of the phrase. "And what do you want to do?" Nobody asked Molly that. Not really. Not in a way that expected an honest answer. She looked toward the exit, then toward the upper balconies, where the shadows gathered beneath painted cherubs and dusty velvet. Her sensible mind told her to leave at once. Walk out. Get on the bus. Go home. Forget his eyes. Forget the apology. Forget the way the room had bent around him. Instead, she heard herself say, "I want some air." A faint smile touched Roberto's mouth. Not warm, exactly, but real enough to be dangerous. "Then walk with me." The closed upper balcony smelled like dust, old roses, and rain slipping through cracks in stone. The noise of the auction softened below them until it became a distant murmur, like the sea heard from inside a dream. Roberto walked at Molly's pace. That surprised her. Men who wanted to appear powerful often walked ahead and expected the world to hurry. Roberto did not hurry. He moved beside her with patient control, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, his eyes occasionally drifting toward the stage below. Molly kept a careful distance from the railing. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, "I did." She gave a small, humorless laugh. "That must be nice." "What?" "Living in a world where you can just decide there have to be consequences." Roberto looked at her then, and for the first time, something in his expression changed. Interest became attention. "And you do not live in that world." Molly touched the sleeve of her black dress, smoothing a wrinkle that did not matter. "People like me usually can't afford consequences. If I snap back at a customer, my boss loses business. If I embarrass someone rich, someone poor pays for it later, so you learn to let things pass. Even when they hurt you. Especially then, Molly said. The words hung there, softer than she expected, more honest than she meant to be. She looked away, embarrassed. Below them, an auctioneer began speaking about a ruby necklace once owned by a countess with a tragic marriage. People murmured appreciatively. Molly wondered how much tragedy cost when it came with rubies. Roberto stopped near a row of covered seats. That is a sad way to survive. It's still surviving. Yes, he said quietly. But surviving is not the same as living. Molly almost smiled. That sounds like something rich people say right before they tell you to follow your dreams. And what were your dreams? The question landed too close. Molly looked down at her hands. There was a pinprick on her thumb from the gown repair, a tiny red mark near the nail. Nothing useful. Tell me anyway. She should not have told him, but the balcony was dim, the room below was far away, and Roberto Salieri had the strange gift of making silence feel less empty. Fashion design, she said, a long time ago. I wanted to make clothes for women who never got to feel beautiful in stores. Women with bodies like mine. Women who got told to be grateful if something zipped. She shrugged, trying to make the confession smaller. Then my dad got sick. Bills happened. Life happened. Dreams are expensive. Roberto watched her with a stillness that made her nervous. And now? Now I fix gowns for women who can afford dreams by the hour. Something dark moved behind his eyes. Not pity, not exactly anger, but close to both. You speak as if your life is already finished. Molly's laugh came out softer this time. No, just practical. Practical people often mistake their cages for good judgment. She looked at him sharply. And dangerous men often mistake interest for rescue. For 1 second, Roberto did not answer. Then he smiled, and this smile was different. It reached his eyes just enough to make him look almost human. There you are, he said. Molly's breath caught. What does that mean? It means I wondered how long it would take you to stop lowering your voice. She did not know whether to be flattered or insulted. Somehow, she was both. I should go. Yes, Roberto said. You should. Neither of them moved. A sound echoed from below, applause rising as something was sold for a price Molly would not earn in 5 years. The old opera house seemed to breathe around them. Molly felt the odd weight of the night pressing in, as if the building itself knew she had stepped out of the narrow path set for her and could not easily step back. Roberto walked her down through a private staircase that avoided the main hall. At the service entrance, the repaired gown had apparently found its owner without Molly's help, and a receipt waited on a small table with her name written correctly across the top. That detail unsettled her more than it should have. Outside, the rain had stopped. A black car waited at the curb. I can take the bus, Molly said. I know. I'm not getting into your car because you tell me to. I am not telling you. Roberto opened the rear door and stepped back. I am offering. Molly looked at the car, then at the wet street, then at the man beside her. Every sensible thought she had was waving its arms like a warning flag. But she was tired, and the night was cold, and some reckless part of her wanted, just once, to accept comfort without apologizing for needing it. She got in. The car was warm and smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Roberto did not climb in after her. He only leaned slightly toward the open door, his face half-shadowed beneath the opera house lights. Good night, Miss Johnston. Molly held his gaze. Good night, Mr. Salieri. His mouth curved faintly at the formality, and then the door closed. The ride home was silent except for the soft hum of the engine and the whisper of tires over wet pavement. Molly watched the city change outside the tinted window, gold theaters giving way to closed storefronts, clean sidewalks giving way to cracked ones, bright awnings fading into flickering signs. By the time the car stopped in front of her apartment building, the whole evening already felt unreal, like a fever dream wrapped in velvet and rain. She was halfway to the door when the driver called her name. "Miss Johnston, you forgot this." He handed her a cream-colored envelope. Molly waited until she was inside her apartment, deadbolt turned, shoes kicked off, before opening it. Her little living room was cold. The radiator had not worked right in weeks, and the landlord kept promising repairs that never came. A lamp flickered beside her second-hand couch. The silence of home, usually comforting, felt different tonight, thinner, as if something had followed her in. Inside the envelope was a note written in dark ink on thick paper. The first line made her sit down slowly. "The rent for Bellamy Bridal has been paid for 6 months." Molly read it once, then again. Her hand went cold around the paper. Mrs. Bellamy's rent, 6 months. The difference between closing and surviving. The difference between Molly having a job next week and standing in an unemployment line with a bag of thread and no plan. Her heart beat slowly, heavily, as she turned the note over. On the back, beneath one clean line of handwriting, was an address and a time. Dinner, Friday night. Roberto. Molly sat in the weak yellow light of her apartment, still wearing her damp black dress, with the most dangerous invitation of her life resting in her lap. She knew what a smart woman would do. A smart woman would tear the note in half, lock the door, and never speak his name again. A smart woman would understand that men like Roberto Salieri did not enter ordinary lives without changing their shape forever. But Molly had spent years being smart, in ways that kept her small. She had been careful, she had been useful, she had been quiet, and still, life had taken what it wanted from her. Outside, a car rolled slowly past her building, then disappeared into the night. Molly looked down at the invitation again, and against every practical instinct she had spent her life building, she realized the truth. She was afraid of Roberto Salieri. But she wanted to know what would happen if she said yes. Molly did not sleep much after the note arrived. She placed it on the kitchen table, then moved it to the windowsill, then tucked it under a chipped blue mug, as if paper from Roberto Salieri might somehow escape if left uncovered. Every time she tried to look away, her eyes found it again. Dinner, Friday night. One simple word and one simple time, written by a man whose name could make a room full of rich people forget how to breathe. Her small apartment felt different with the note inside it. The weak radiator clanked in the corner. The pipes groaned behind the walls. A thin line of cold air slipped beneath the window frame, brushing her ankles. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt watched. By morning, Molly had almost convinced herself that the whole thing was a mistake. Men like Roberto did not send dinner invitations to women like her unless they wanted something. Maybe he needed a gown repaired. Maybe he wanted to ask questions about the auction. Maybe he was the kind of man who saw every person as a tool and had simply decided she might be useful for a little while. That thought should have made saying no easier. Instead, it only made her more restless. She went to work with the note folded deep in her purse, as if it were a secret she could not admit she was keeping. Bellamy Bridal was warmer than usual when she arrived. Not emotionally warmer, actually warmer. The broken heat had been repaired overnight. Mrs. Bellamy stood in the front room staring at the vent like it had performed a miracle. Her eyes were red, but she was smiling for the first time in months. She grabbed Molly's hands before Molly could take off her coat. "The rent is paid," she whispered. 6 months, Molly. 6 months. I don't know how, but it's paid." Molly felt the blood rush out of her face. Maybe the landlord made a mistake. Mrs. Bellamy gave a shaky laugh. Landlords don't make mistakes that generous. Molly said nothing. She went into the back room, hung up her coat, and sat at her sewing machine for several minutes without touching the fabric in front of her. She should have felt relief. Part of her did. Bellamy Bridal was safe for now. Mrs. Bellamy would not lose the shop. Molly would not lose the one place where her hands still mattered. But underneath the relief, something colder moved. Roberto had not asked permission. He had stepped into her life and solved a problem she had never told him about. It was kind. It was frightening. It was both, and that was what made it hard to breathe. Friday came slowly, then all at once. Molly spent too long choosing what to wear and hated herself for caring. She owned no dresses that belonged in the kind of place Roberto might choose. She finally settled on a deep green wrap dress she had altered from a clearance rack find, letting out the seams until it held her body instead of fighting it. The fabric was soft over her stomach and hips, and the neckline framed her chest in a way that made her nervous but not ashamed. She pinned her dark hair back loosely, then took it down, then pinned it again. When she looked in the mirror, she saw every flaw first, because old habits were cruel and fast. Then, for one strange second, she saw the shape of a woman going somewhere dangerous by choice. The car arrived at 7 exactly. It did not take her to a restaurant. It moved through the city, away from the bright noise of downtown, through quiet streets lined with old brick buildings and sleeping trees, until it stopped outside a glass greenhouse, tucked behind a closed botanical garden. The building glowed from within, soft and golden against the dark. Inside, flowers bloomed under warm lamps, white and pale pink and deep purple, their petals open to the night as if daylight had never been necessary. The air was damp, fragrant, and alive. For a moment, Molly forgot to be afraid. Roberto was waiting near a small table set beneath hanging vines. He wore a black suit again, but no tie this time. The open collar of his shirt made him look less formal and somehow more dangerous. He watched her approach with the same still attention he had given her at the opera house, the kind that made her feel not inspected, but discovered. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." "I know." That made her stop. "You know?" His mouth curved faintly. "You are too practical to say yes easily." Molly folded her arms over her stomach before she could stop herself. "And you are too used to getting what you want." "Yes," Roberto said. "That is true." His honesty should have annoyed her. It did, but it also disarmed her. He pulled out her chair, then waited. He did not touch her. He did not guide her into place with a hand on her back. He simply offered space and allowed her to decide what to do with it. Molly sat. Dinner moved like a dream with teeth hidden inside it. The food was beautiful and simple. Roasted chicken, warm bread, butter with sea salt, pears in honey, things that did not try too hard. Roberto asked questions that were too specific to be casual. He knew her father had driven city buses for 27 years before his heart failed. He knew her brother, Jonah, still had hospital bills from the accident that damaged his leg. He knew Molly had applied to fashion school once and withdrawn before the first semester because tuition and grief had arrived at the same time. He knew Bellamy Bridal was behind on rent before Molly had known he knew her last name. "You researched me," Molly said quietly. "Yes, that is not charming." "No," he agreed. "It is not." "Then why admit it?" "Because lying to you would be insulting." Molly looked across the table at him, trying to understand the shape of this man. He was not soft. He was not safe. But he was not careless either. "You paid the shop's rent." "I did." "You had no right." His eyes did not leave hers. "No, I had money." "That is not the same thing." For the first time that night, Roberto looked away, not far, only toward the pale flowers, brushing the glass above them, but Molly saw it, the smallest fracture in his certainty. "No," he said, "it is not." The words should have ended the evening. Instead, they opened something. Molly told him about working in a shop where every bride wanted to be smaller, and every mother wanted a tighter waist, and every dress seemed designed to punish the body inside it. She told him how strange it was to spend years making other women feel beautiful while never believing beauty was available to her without an apology attached. Roberto listened without interrupting. That was the dangerous part. Not his money, not his reputation, his attention. It rested on her with the weight of a hand she had not agreed to hold. After that night, Roberto began moving through her life like a shadow with keys to every locked door. Jonah called, stunned and crying, because his remaining medical debt had vanished. Her landlord suddenly sent a repairman for the radiator, the window, and the lock that had stuck for 2 winters. Bellamy Bridal received 3 high-paying private clients in 1 week, all women who wanted difficult work and did not blink at Molly's rates. A designer Molly had followed for years emailed her about freelance pattern work, praising a small online portfolio Molly had forgotten she had ever posted. Each gift was wrapped in opportunity. Each opportunity felt almost innocent until she saw the pattern underneath it. Roberto was not only helping her, he was clearing the road around her, removing stress, removing debt, removing reasons to say no. The warning came on a rainy Wednesday after closing. Molly was alone in the back room, fitting lace over a bodice, when the front bell chimed. She expected Mrs. Bellamy, maybe a late bride, maybe someone lost. Instead, an older woman stepped inside wearing a grey coat and a calm expression that made the room feel smaller. Her silver hair was tucked neatly behind her ears. She carried no umbrella, though rain darkened her shoulders. She introduced herself as Celeste Armand. "I used to be legal counsel for Roberto's father," Celeste said. Molly did not move from behind the work table. "That sounds like the beginning of a warning." "It is." Celeste walked slowly around the shop, touching nothing, seeing everything. She looked at the gowns, the pins, the tired machine, the coffee cup near Molly's elbow. Then she looked at Molly with no pity at all, which Molly appreciated more than kindness. The Salieri men can be generous in a way that feels like rescue at first. They solve problems, they make calls, they move money, they punish disrespect. It can feel like love, especially when the world has denied you basic care for so long. Molly's throat tightened. "You don't know what he feels." "No," Celeste said, "but I know what he was taught." Roberto's father believed love was a territory to be secured. He never began with cruelty. He began with solutions. By the time the women in his life understood the cage, they had forgotten where they left the key. The room hummed with the old fluorescent light. Molly looked down at the half-finished gown beneath her hands. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Roberto may not be his father," Celeste said gently, "but he was raised in his house." Molly wanted to dismiss it. She wanted to say she was not foolish, not helpless, not some soft thing waiting to be claimed. But Celeste's warning had found the same uneasy place Molly had been pressing her palm against for days. Roberto's gifts had helped her. They had also unsettled her. Both truths stood side by side, refusing to cancel each other out. That night, Molly confronted him outside the bridal shop. His car was waiting, as it often was now, too sleek and quiet for her street. He stepped out before the driver could open his door, his expression softening when he saw her, then sharpening when he saw her face. "Victor Sloane was attacked," Molly said. "The man from the auction." Roberto did not pretend not to know. "Yes." Her stomach turned. "Was that you?" "I gave the order." The simple answer struck harder than a lie would have. Molly stared at him, rain gathering in her hair. "Because he insulted me? Because he insulted you publicly after being told to apologize. In my world, public disrespect cannot be left unanswered." "Your world," she repeated, "not mine." His jaw tightened. "Molly." "No, listen to me. I know he was cruel. I know he deserved shame. Maybe he deserved fear, but you didn't protect me by hurting him after the fact. You protected your pride. You protected your name. You made my humiliation part of your reputation." Something flickered in Roberto's eyes. something darker than anger, because it included the possibility that she was right. Molly stepped closer, her voice shaking but clear. Protection without consent is not love. It is another kind of cage. For once, Roberto Salieri had no answer ready. He left that night without asking her to get in the car. Molly watched the taillights disappear through the wet street and felt no victory. Only sadness, sharp and strange. She did not want him to be harmless. That would be a lie, and Molly had spent enough of her life living inside lies built for other people's comfort. But she wanted him to understand that she was not a problem to be solved. She was a person, a whole person, and if he could not learn the difference, then all his devotion would eventually become another beautiful room with no door. 2 nights later, an envelope slid under her apartment door. There was no note inside, only a torn photograph of Molly and Roberto in the greenhouse, taken through the glass. On the back, written in black marker, were 4 words: "Ask him about Isadora Vale." Molly sat on her couch with the photograph in her lap until the room blurred. She knew the Vale name. The antique gown from the auction had been called the Vale gown. At first she thought it had to be a coincidence, but the longer she stared at the photograph, the less she believed in coincidence. When Roberto arrived, he did not knock like a man coming to explain. He knocked like a man who already knew danger had entered the room. She handed him the photo without speaking. The change in him was immediate. His face went still, then colder than she had ever seen it. "Who gave you this?" "That is your first question?" "It is the question that keeps you alive. Makes me feel very cherished." His eyes lifted to hers. "Isadora Vale was my fiancé." The word fiancé moved through the apartment like a ghost. Molly folded her arms. And she betrayed me. Years ago, she stole coded ledgers from my private office. Shipping routes, safe houses, names of men who trusted me. That information reached a rival family. People died because of it. "Did you kill her?" "No." Molly searched his face. "Why?" "Because I loved her." There it was, a truth with blood on the edges. Roberto looked past Molly toward the dark window. "I exiled her, took her money, her contacts, her protection. She disappeared. I thought that was the end of it. But someone wants me to know her name." "Yes." "Because they think I will become her?" "No." Roberto's voice was sharp enough to cut. Then it lowered. "Because they think I already fear that you will." Molly felt the soft fear of that settle into her bones. It was not jealousy. It was worse. It was the understanding that Roberto had been betrayed through love once, and men like him did not survive betrayal by becoming more open. They survived by locking every door twice. The next warning came inside her apartment. Molly returned from work to find nothing stolen, nothing broken, no drawer pulled open, no cabinet disturbed. Only an old brass token sitting in the middle of her kitchen table, stamped with the faded image of the Bellather Opera House. She did not touch it. She called Roberto with shaking hands, and within 10 minutes, men filled her hallway, silent and efficient, checking windows, dusting surfaces, speaking into earpieces. Roberto stood beside the table, looking at the token, as if it had insulted him personally. "There are 2 threats moving at once," he said. "A rival family outside my walls, and someone inside them feeding information." Molly wrapped her arms around herself. "So I am bait." "No." "Roberto." His mouth tightened. "You are proof." "Proof of what?" "That I can be reached." The honesty was worse than comfort. Molly leaned against the counter, trying to slow her breathing. She expected him to demand she move into one of his guarded homes. She expected orders, pressure, maybe the polished force of a man who believed fear gave him permission. Instead, Roberto took a folded envelope from inside his coat and placed it beside the token. "There is enough money here to start over," he said. "A new name, a safe apartment far away. People who can help you disappear." You can leave tonight." Molly stared at the envelope. The old Molly, the careful Molly, the Molly who survived by keeping her head down, would have taken it. She might have hated herself for taking it, but she would have taken it. Then she looked at the brass token, the one someone had placed on her table to make her feel small in her own home. "No," she said. Roberto's eyes darkened. "Molly, no. I will not be disappeared for my own good. You do not get to decide my safety by removing my choices. Your enemies already brought this into my kitchen. If I am part of the danger, then I get the truth. I get a say." A long silence followed. Roberto looked at her as if every rule he had ever trusted had turned to smoke in his hands. Then he nodded once. "Then you stand beside me." "Beside," Molly said, "not behind." The private Salieri gathering took place 3 nights later in a renovated train depot Roberto owned on the edge of the city. The building had been remade into a fortress of brick, steel, polished concrete, and shadow. Old tracks still ran beneath glass flooring. Brass clocks hung on the walls. Men in dark suits stood near every exit, speaking quietly into hidden microphones. Molly arrived in a navy gown she had altered herself, one that moved around her body like water instead of apology. She had sewn the waist to support her, shaped the sleeves to flatter her arms, and stitched a tiny piece of green thread near the hem where no one else could see it, a private reminder that she still belonged to herself. When she entered with Roberto, the room noticed. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed disapproval. A few showed calculation. Molly felt the weight of them all, and for a moment, the old instinct came back, telling her to soften herself, lower her chin, become less visible. Then Roberto's hand hovered near her back without touching, waiting, asking without words. Molly gave the smallest nod, and only then did his palm rest lightly between her shoulders. That one pause mattered more than the touch. He introduced her clearly, not as a guest, not as a distraction, not as a weakness. Molly Johnston, no title given to make her acceptable. No lie offered to make the room comfortable, just her name, held steady in Roberto's voice. Elias Crown stood near the old ticket office, Roberto's trusted second-in-command, a lean man with pale eyes and a smile that never seemed to arrive at the same time as his words. He bowed slightly to Molly. "Miss Johnston, we have heard a great deal. I'm sure none of it was accurate," Molly said. His smile thinned. Roberto looked almost amused. The evening moved carefully. There were drinks, low conversations, men who laughed without showing ease, women who watched from the edges of power with eyes much sharper than their jewelry. Molly felt the strange rhythm of Roberto's world. Nothing was just a greeting. Nothing was just a look. Every small movement carried meaning. Who approached first? Who stood too close? Who failed to acknowledge her? Who acknowledged her too warmly? It was exhausting, this constant reading of danger dressed as manners. For the first time, Molly understood that Roberto's control was not only arrogance, it was armor worn so long it had grown into his skin. Then the lights went out. The depot dropped into darkness so suddenly that the silence seemed to crack. A second later, emergency lamps flashed red along the floor. Someone shouted. Glass shattered below. Roberto's hand closed around Molly's wrist, firm but not painful, and he moved her behind a pillar as gunfire burst from the lower level. The sound was not like movies. It was louder, flatter, uglier, each shot tearing through the air and leaving fear behind it. "This way," Roberto said, already pulling her toward a reinforced door near the back hall. Molly dug in her heels. "No." His face turned toward her, lit red by the emergency lamps. "Not now. You said beside you. I said alive." An armed man came through the smoke near the old ticket office before either of them could move. He raised his weapon. Roberto shoved Molly down and fired twice. The man stumbled but did not fall. Another rushed from behind the counter, too close, too fast. Roberto turned, but the angle was wrong. Molly saw the antique fire axe mounted on the wall before she had time to think. Her hands closed around the handle. The glass case cracked under her elbow, pain flashing through her arm. The axe was heavier than she expected, but fear made her strong. She swung with everything in her tired body, not gracefully, not like a warrior in a story, but like a woman who had spent her life carrying more weight than anyone noticed. The blunt side hit the attacker's shoulder and knocked him hard into the ticket window. He dropped his weapon with a cry. Roberto's men reached them seconds later and dragged him down. Molly stood there shaking, both hands locked around the axe handle, her chest heaving, her dress torn near the hem. Roberto stared at her as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. "I told you," she breathed. "Beside." His expression broke open for 1 second, raw and proud and terrified. Then he took her face in his hands, touched his forehead to hers, and whispered, "Beside." The attack failed, but it left the truth behind. Elias Crown had sold information to the rival family for over a year. The power cut, the breach point, even the timing of Molly's arrival had all passed through him. He had believed Roberto's attachment made him weak. He had believed Isadora had nearly ruined Roberto once, and Molly would finish what Isadora started. He had wanted to prove that love was a liability before anyone else had the courage to say it. Roberto captured him before dawn. Molly did not watch what happened after that. Roberto did not ask her to. That mattered too. Instead, she sat in a quiet room above the depot with a blanket around her shoulders, and Celeste Armand beside her, both of them listening to the rain begin again against the high windows. "You were right," Molly said. Celeste looked at her. "About what?" "He does not know the difference easily." "No," Celeste said, "but tonight he tried to learn." For weeks after, Roberto's world turned inward. Men changed positions. Safe houses closed. New names appeared in places old names had been. He became quieter, more watchful, but not colder with Molly. That was the part that surprised her. She had expected the betrayal to make him lock every door, including the one between them. Sometimes he tried. She could see it in him. The old instinct to protect by controlling, to love by surrounding, to fear loss so deeply that choice began to look like danger. But when he reached for the old way, Molly named it, and slowly, painfully, he listened. She did not move into his house. She kept her apartment, though Roberto made certain the locks worked and the heat stayed on. She kept working at Bellamy Bridal until she did not need to anymore, and when the time came to leave, she left with Mrs. Bellamy, crying into her shoulder and promising to send every bride in the city her way. Molly opened a small design studio in a second-floor space above a bakery, where the air smelled like sugar in the mornings, and the windows caught good light in the afternoon. She made gowns for plus-size women who had spent too long being told to settle. She made interview clothes for working women who needed confidence more than silk. She made prom dresses for girls who cried when the zipper closed without shame. Her prices were fair, sometimes too fair, and when Roberto quietly suggested she was bad at capitalism, she told him she was excellent at dignity. The studio grew. Then it became more than a studio. With money Roberto offered and Molly accepted only after writing her own terms, she built a foundation for working-class women who needed legal help, emergency rent, job training, clothes for interviews, and sometimes just one person to say that being tired did not mean being defeated. Roberto wanted to fund all of it. Molly let him fund some. The rest she raised herself, loudly and stubbornly, because she needed the work to belong to her. Their relationship survived because it stopped being a rescue and became a negotiation. Neither of them was allowed to win alone. They made rules, no secrets that affected her safety, no decisions made in her name without her voice. no gifts designed like locks, no punishment carried out on her behalf without telling her the truth. Roberto struggled with the rules. Some days he hated them. Some days Molly saw his jaw tighten around words he wanted to turn into commands. But he tried. And because he tried, she stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go. Because she had somewhere else to go and still chose to walk back. Months later, the Bellather Opera House reopened after a long restoration. Brighter than before, but still carrying its old shadows in the corners. Molly attended as the founder of her own studio and foundation, not as a delivery woman mistaken for someone with a right to enter. Her name was on the guest list, correctly spelled. When she stepped through the front doors, no one handed her the wrong badge. No one asked if she belonged. She wore a gown of her own design, deep midnight blue, with silver thread along the sleeves, cut for her fat body, with love instead of compromise. It did not hide her stomach, or shrink her hips, or pretend her arms were not soft. It honored her. Every seam knew her shape, and did not apologize for it. Roberto saw her at the top of the aisle, and went still. For once, Molly let herself enjoy being looked at, not judged, not measured. Scene. The evening passed in a wash of music, speeches, champagne, and polite society pretending it had never been afraid of the Salieri name. Molly spoke with donors, designers, women who wanted help, women who wanted to help, and girls who looked at her gown like it had opened a door in their minds. Roberto stayed near enough to be present and far enough to let the night be hers. That distance was its own kind of devotion. After the guests left, the opera house settled into quiet. Staff moved softly near the lobby. The chandeliers dimmed. The stage stood empty. Molly walked down the center aisle slowly, remembering the first night, the mistaken badge, Victor's cruel smile, Roberto's quiet command, the way humiliation had almost swallowed her, before something dangerous stepped between her and the room. She was not grateful for the cruelty. She would never pretend pain was a gift, but she could see now that one wrong door had led her to a life where she no longer waited for permission to take up space. Roberto came to stand beside her in the aisle. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he held out his hand. "Molly," he said softly, "will you dance with me?" The question warmed something deep in her chest. He had asked. Not ordered, not assumed, asked. Molly looked at his hand, then at his face. The man beside her was still dangerous, still marked by violence, loyalty, and old shadows. He would never be simple. Their story would never be clean or safe, and maybe that was why she trusted it more than a fairy tale. Fairy tales often ended before anyone had to change. Roberto had changed. So had she. Not into softer people, into truer ones. She placed her hand in his. Yes. There was no music at first, only the quiet breath of the old opera house, and the distant sound of rain beginning against the roof. Then Roberto drew her gently into the aisle, one hand at her waist, light enough to let her move, steady enough to remind her he was there. Molly followed, then led, then laughed under her breath when he let her. Her gown moved around her like night sky. The silver thread caught the dim light. For the first time in that building, Molly did not feel like a mistake that had wandered through the wrong door. She felt like the woman the room had been waiting for. Roberto lowered his mouth near her ear, his voice quiet enough to belong only to her. "You changed my world." Molly smiled, not softly, not shyly, but with the calm of a woman who had earned every inch of herself. "No," she whispered, "I made you enter mine." And beneath the faded angels, under the watchful balconies of the Bellather Opera House, Molly Johnston danced with the most dangerous man she had ever known. No longer chosen like a possession, no longer hidden like a secret, but standing in the full shape of her own life. She had learned the difference between being wanted and being owned. She had learned that love without freedom was only another beautiful cage, and as Roberto held her carefully, asking with every step instead of claiming with every breath, Molly knew this was not the end of danger, or desire, or fear. It was simply the first night she was not afraid to be seen.